What's up everybody? If you're enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Almost 3 out of 4 viewers aren't subscribed, and I'd love to have you join the crew. And while you're at it, smash that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. Living 5 miles from Florida's Atlantic coast means salt air bleeds into everything. The sun-bleached siding of our house, peeling like sunburned skin, the tangled mangroves framing the tidal creek behind our property, their roots clutching at briny mud like arthritic fingers. Even the ice cubes in our freezer taste faintly of the ocean, as if the sea had seeped into the tap water while we weren't looking. Dad's 27-foot center console, the salty Serenity, might as well be a 4th family member. Her hull is pocked with barnacle scars, her vinyl seats cracked like desert earth, but Dad polishes her twice a week with the devotion of a priest tending an altar. Come June, when the pavement starts sweating by 9 a.m., leaving the backyard asphalt shimmering like a mirage, our weekend routines shift. No more strolling Cocoa Beach at sunset, the sand cool and sugared between our toes. No more road trips to Georgia's mountains where the air smells of pine resin instead of decayed jellyfish. Just the Serenity cutting through Mosquito Lagoon's tea-dark water, her twin outboards growling as Dad grins into the wind like a kid gripping a roller coaster bar, his baseball cap flipped backwards so the brim doesn't snap off in the gale. That Friday in July clung to us like wet gauze, the kind they press over a wound to staunch bleeding. Humidity hummed pregnant over the intracoastal, thickening the air until dragonflies moved through it like swimmers fighting a riptide. The dock's wooden planks wept beads of condensation, and the rope lines sagged, limp as dead eels. Cicadas screamed in the palmettos, their drone rising and falling like a theremin's whine. Mom hovered in the kitchen doorway, her knuckles white around a ginger ale can, her seasick armor, she called it, though we all knew the cure wasn't working today. The aluminum dented under her grip, droplets sliding down the sides to pool on the linoleum. She worn that same wilted smile when Dad announced the trip, her eyes tracking the Serenity's keys as they jingled in his hand. "Y'all go," she said, too quickly, her voice fraying at the edges. "I'll defrost the conch fritters for when you're back." The freezer hummed in agreement, exhaling a plume of frost as she opened it. Dad didn't need persuading. He was already halfway to the dock, his flip-flops slapping against the warped boards, shouting over his shoulder about a new sandbar he'd spotted near the Spoil Islands. "Gonna be classy out there." Classy meant flat water, which meant he'd open the throttle wide, let the boat fly until the bow lifted and the world blurred into seagrass and sky, the horizon line trembling like a plucked guitar string. I hesitated, watching Mom press the Culkin to her forehead, her eyelids fluttering as condensation trickled down her temple. She shooed me off with a flick of her dish towel, a faded thing patterned with lobsters and anchor knots, but not before I caught the way her gaze snagged on the horizon. Not wary, but hungry, as if she were staring at a ghost ship only she could see, its sails full of the same wind that used to fill her lungs when she'd raced Dad to the channel markers, back when her stomach didn't turn at the smell of diesel and low tide. The salty Serenity sliced into the bay, her cooler packed with Dad's lime-flavored seltzers, cans slick with condensation, their tabs hissing like tiny airlocks, and my mason jar of lemonade, still pulpy with rind the way Mom insists on making it, the bitterness clinging to the back of the throat like a secret. Mosquito Lagoon hummed with July's feverish energy, jet skis zigzagged like water striders, their wakes crisscrossing into lace, while toddlers shrieked as mullet leapt silver arcs over their inflatable rafts, their scales catching the light like flung nickels. From Sharky's shack, its roof patched with license plates and fish nets sagging with plastic crabs, The tinny thump of sack brown band covers drifted across the water, the chorus of knee-deep warring with the guttural croak of bullfrogs in the sawgrass. Dad docked at their warp pier with a captain's flourish, the Serenity's hull kissing the pilings with a groan, and tossed the rope to a sunburned teenager whose shoulders blistered tomato red beneath peeling tattoos of anchor ink. The kid nodded like they'd rehearsed this 100 times, his bare feet gripping the splintered wood with the ease of someone who'd never known shoes. Time dissolved. We ate blackened mahi tacos that burned our tongues, the charred edges crumbling into our laps, their heat cut by dollops of mango salsa so bright it tasted like summer itself. We laughed as pelicans dive-bombed for our discarded lime wedges, their beaks snapping shut with a sound like castanets, wings grazing the water's surface as if testing its temperature. The sun melted us into the vinyl seats, the material sticking to our thighs like warm glue, until dusk arrived unannounced. The horizon bled tangerine and violet, the water reflecting the sky's fire like spilled gasoline, iridescent and dangerous. Dad raised his last seltzer in salute, the aluminum crumpled in his fist, condensation dripping onto his wristwatch. "Tonight's that outshine days," he said, his voice roughened by salt and sun, and I clinked my lemonade against his can, the glass ringing hollow. I didn't yet notice how his toast sounded like a warning, how his eyes lingered a beat too long on the darkening east, where the first stars pricked through the bruise-colored sky. Darkness fell with the finality of a theater curtain, the last daylight snuffed out behind the spoil islands. Dad queued up his night cruisin' playlist, Springsteen's Growl, Seeger's Gravel Road Rasp, that one CCR song he swears every boat needs, and cranked the volume until the bass vibrated in my molars, the speakers buzzing like hornets in a jar. We glided into the unlit stretch beyond the channel markers, where the lagoon widens into a black mirror, the mangroves reduced to jagged cutouts against the moonless sky. The Serenity's running lights painted emerald ripples on the water, their glow dissolving inches below the surface as if the lagoon drank the light whole. The air turned crisp, carrying the sweetness of night-blooming jasmine, thick as syrup, tangled with something sharper, metallic, like a penny held on the tongue. It clung to the back of the throat, a taste that wasn't quite a taste, as the boat pushed farther into the void, the only sound the churn of the engines and the occasional slap of a mullet fleeing our wake. We passed near a lighthouse, a skeletal sentinel perched on Ponce Inlet's crumbling jetty, its iron ribs exposed where storms had gnawed through limestone flesh. Its beam sliced through the dark every 10 seconds, a staccato swish-swish that lit the foam around us in stark, clinical white, bleaching the color from Dad's face and my trembling hands. Shadows leapt and contorted in its glare, seaweed became grasping fingers, drifting logs arched like the spines of drowned creatures. The light's pulse throbbed in time with my heartbeat, each pass leaving after images burned into my retinas. I gripped the console, the fiberglass edge biting into my palm. "That thing's straight out of a Stephen King novel," I said, too loud, my voice cracking like the gulls screeching overhead. Dad smirked, his face half lit by the GPS screen's ghostly green glow, the other half drowned in shadow. "Built in 1887, he said, as if reciting a psalm, "back when this inlet ate ships for breakfast." He adjusted his grip on the wheel, the leather wrap creaking. "Your great-granddad used to supply the keepers. Said they'd trade whiskey for snapper, fresh snapper, not that freezer-burnt crap." He nudged me, his calloused hand rough on my shoulder, the salt-stiffened fabric of his shirt scraping my neck. "Relax, kid. Only ghosts out here are the ones we bring with us." His laugh was a dry thing, lost to the growl of the engine, but his thumb tapped the throttle twice, quick and restless. The beam swept over us again. For a heartbeat, the lighthouse's brickwork seemed to ripple, its mortar oozing black as crude oil, rivulets crawling downward like veins. Thin darkness swallowed it whole, leaving only the aftertaste of that image, a wet, glistening rot. I blinked, but the tower stood inert again, its cracks and fissures frozen in the brief glare. The air smelled different here, the usual brine undercut by a dankness, like the inside of a storm drain after a flood. Dad killed the engine. The salty Serenity's hum died abruptly, leaving a vacuum of sound so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the click-click of cooling metal from the outboards. The boat swayed, creaking like an old floorboard, as waves lapped at the hull with wet, open-mouthed kisses. My skin prickled, gooseflesh rising despite the humidity. I couldn't stop staring at the lighthouse. Its beam carved the dark into fragments, each pass illuminating the tower's peeling paint, its rusted railing clawing at the sky. It looked less like a guide now and more like a bone jutting from a grave, something the earth had tried to bury but couldn't quite keep down. Dad rummaged in the cooler for another seltzer, the crack hiss of the tab deafening. "Trust the process," he muttered, though I couldn't tell if he was talking to me or the night itself. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the sound at first, not over Springsteen's growl bleeding from the speakers, not over the Serenity's hull slapping the waves like a restless heartbeat. Then it came again, a scream. Not the distant whoop of a drunk tourist or the theatrical shriek of a gull, but a raw, guttural sound, the kind that shreds vocal cords, that belongs to animals caught in steel traps. It cut through the bass line, sharp as a fillet knife. "Dad, kill the music." I lunged for the stereo, slapping at the volume knob, my palm slipping on its sweat-slick plastic. He flinched, his sunburned face slack with confusion, the pink peeling skin around his eyes crinkling like tissue paper. The speakers went silent. The quiet that followed was suffocating, a wool blanket pressed over the world, smothering even the lap of waves against the hull. "Someone's out there," I whispered. My throat tightened, every hair on my arm standing rigid as porcupine quills. Dad's grin from earlier had vanished. He gripped the wheel, his knuckles bleached white as barnacle shells, as the scream came again, closer this time, or maybe the water carried it sharper, honed by the lagoon's curved throat. A woman's voice, fraying into a sob, skated across the black water. My eyes found the island, a jagged smudge in the moonlight, half swallowed by mist that coiled like smoke from a doused fire. No boats. No lights. Just that ragged silhouette, its shoreline clawed by currents that could capsize a kayak in seconds, that could drag you down to where the crabs pick bones clean. We didn't move. Didn't breathe. The Serenity rocked gently, mocking the stillness, her hull creaking like a taunt. I counted the seconds, 10, 20, 40. Nothing. The lagoon stretched empty, a black sheet ironed flat, its surface oily and unbroken. No life jacket bobbed in the swells, no hands broke the surface, fingers splayed like starfish. Only the island, hunched and silent, a place where the water itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to exhale its secrets. Help! The cry tore through the night, brittle and fractured, the vowels splintering. Dad fumbled for the spotlight, its beam quaking as he swept it over the water, the light catching the iridescent swirl of baitfish fleeing some unseen predator. The island loomed, all jagged coral teeth and spindly sea-grape trees, their leaves glinting like knife edges in the stark white glare. "Where are you?" we shouted in unison, our voices thin against the vastness, swallowed by the dark as if the lagoon had no bottom, no end. "Being followed." The reply screamed. Followed? My mind snagged on the word. Are you on the island? Dad barked, louder now, the spotlight jerking across the shore, illuminating skeletal driftwood and shadows that twitched like living things. Her answer was a scream, a serrated, sustained note that raised the flesh on my neck, that left my eardrums throbbing. Yes. Dad didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life, a feral sound that scattered the quiet, the sudden violence of it sending a cormorant bursting from the reeds in a panic of wings. The Serenity lurched forward, bow slamming into waves as we charged the island, the hull shuddering like it might splinter. The cliffs reared up, pitted limestone glowing bone-white in the spotlight, pockmarks gaping like eye sockets. Dad anchored 20 yards out, the chain grating against rock as breakers hissed, hungry, against the hull, their foam glowing faintly with bioluminescent algae, tiny blue sparks dying as they struck the boat. Up close, the island was a feral thing. Seaweed clung to its rocks like matted hair, reeking of rot and brine. The trees leaned at cruel angles, roots exposed like tendons, their bark sloughing off in leprous patches. No footprints marked the narrow beach, no torn fabric fluttered in the branches. Just wind hissing through sawgrass, a low, wet sound, like the island itself was breathing. We pulled on the boots Dad had stashed in the Serenity's compartment, stiff rubber reeking of mildew, soles treadless as dolphin skin. Climbing out shirtless, the rocks bit into my palms, sharp as crab claws, while the boots slipped on algae-slick stone, each step a gamble. Dad's flashlight beam juttered ahead, a frail yellow circle that deepened the darkness around us, the shadows pooling like spilled ink. Call out, he demanded, his voice cracking. The beam swept over gnarled trunks, over tide pools glinting like 1,000 watching eyes, their surfaces trembling with the scuttle of translucent shrimp. No one answered. The chill that crept up my spine wasn't the night's doing. It slithered, serpentine, between my ribs. She could be injured, I said, the words crumbling as they left my lips, dissolving like sand in a receding wave. Or, trapped. Dad's jaw tightened, the tendon flickering like a fishing line under strain. He swung the flashlight beam inland, its light fraying at the edges as it cut through the undergrowth, exposing spider webs strung between sea grape leaves, their silk glinting like nooses. We moved in tandem, boots crunching over shells and driftwood, shouting hello, into the void. Each call dissolved into the wind, unanswered, the island drinking our voices whole. The ground squelched beneath us, sodden with tidal muck that reeked of sulfur and spoiled eggs. Deeper in, the air turned cloying, salt rot and wet limestone, the stench of something decaying beneath the soil, something too large to name. Mangroves crowded us, their roots knuckling up from the ground like buried skeletons, the bark sloughing off in papery strips. Can you hear us? Dad bellowed. The cliffs threw his voice back, warped and watery, as if the island itself were taunting us, mocking our futility. Above, night herons croaked their disapproval, wings snapping through the canopy like wet canvas tearing. The sea hissed, a relentless audience to our search, its rhythm syncopated with the ragged tempo of our breathing. Then, a guttural, choked scream. Not distant. Close. Human, but strangled, half swallowed, as if the mouth that made it were stuffed with kelp. The sound hit me like live wire to the ribs, my muscles seizing. Dad froze, the flashlight trembling in his grip, the beam skittering over roots that now looked like coiled snakes. No words passed between us. We ran. The island fought us. Sawgrass lashed my forearms, drawing blood that welled black in the moonlight. Sand spurs clung to my jeans, their barbs needle-sharp, and my boots skidded on moss-slick rocks, each misstep threatening to twist an ankle. Dad's flashlight beam jutted wildly, carving grotesque shadows from the trees, a hunched figure here, a reaching hand there, all vanishing as the light swept past. My lungs burned, salt and iron coating my tongue. The scream looped in my skull, primal, wrong, propelling me forward even as the terrain turned jagged, cruel, the ground buckling into fissures choked with sea wrack. I stumbled onto the eastern shore, heaving for air, the beam flitting over tide pools alive with scuttling crabs, over boulders crusted with barnacles that yawned like tiny mouths. Nothing. No crumpled form in the surf, no footprints in the muck. Just the moon staring down, cold and dispassionate, and the silence. That silence. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and smug, as if the island had swallowed the woman whole and now licked its lips, sated. Dad caught up, sweat gleaming on his temples like mercury, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to curse, to rationalize, but no sound came. The flashlight's beam shrank, dimming, as if the darkness itself were leeching its power, the batteries draining into the hungry earth. We stood gasping, the scream's echo still thrashing in our skulls. Had we imagined this whole thing? The thought slithered, cold and unwelcome. Around us, the mangroves swayed, though the air hung motionless, their roots creaking like arthritic joints. My flashlight trembled as I swung it toward the shore, the plastic casing creaking in my white-knuckled grip. The beam carved a trembling path through the dark, scattering shadows like roaches fleeing a struck match. The light caught on strands of seaweed dangling from mangrove branches, their tendrils swaying though the air hung utterly still. And there, where the surf gnawed at the rocks, foam hissing between jagged teeth, it stood. Not human. Not animal. A thing of angles and voids, its silhouette a mockery of anatomy, as if a sculptor had assembled bones at random and called it done. Moonlight glazed its emaciated frame, ribs like scythes curving inward, joints knotted and inverted, legs spiraled as if wrung by giant hands. Its skin, if it was skin, glistened wetly, reflecting the beam in oily streaks, the surface rippling like mercury disturbed by a fingertip. The head lolled backward, neck tendons straining like ship's rigging, as it stared into the moon's glare with lidless eyes, pupilless voids that swallowed the light whole. Then, slowly, wrongly, it pivoted toward us. The movement was liquid, boneless, its spine undulating like a sea whip caught in a riptide. The flashlight caught its face, a collapsed star of features. Eyes like pulled mercury, swirling with refracted moonlight. A mouth too small, too precise, a razor-cut slit that peeled open, cartilage crackling like crumpled cellophane as it spoke. "You found me." The voice was a flawless mimicry of the woman's, her panic, her pitch, but warped, as if played through waterlogged speakers. It didn't resonate, it slithered, bypassing the ears to coil directly in the gut, cold and invasive as a swallowed eel. My knees buckled. Dad's grip locked onto my bicep, fingers vice-tight, his nails biting crescents into my skin. Run. No hesitation. No questions. We fled, boots skidding on kelp-slimed rocks, the thing's cries chasing us, sharpening with each step. "Help me," it wailed, each syllable fraying at the edges now, unraveling into something guttural, wetter, the sound of a throat filling with seawater. "Help me." The words splintered, layered with clicks and hisses, a chorus of corrupted voices overlapping, as if a dozen throats had been fused and torn apart. My spine seized a primal recognition, older than language. This wasn't fear. This was pre-knowledge, the hair certainty that the fox's teeth are already at its neck, that the chase is just ritual. We didn't look back. Didn't dare. The island's undergrowth tore at our clothes, thorns biting into wrists, sand spurs embedding in our ankles like fishhooks. Dad's breath sought in his throat, raw and rhythmic, each gasp flavored with salt and copper. The Serenity's running lights glowed ahead, bobbing on the black water like a mirage, the boat's hull groaning as waves slammed it against the anchor. Behind us, the cries mutated, less words now, more vibration, a subsonic hum that made my molars ache and my vision blur. I risked one glance. The thing stood at the tree line, its body contorted into a crouch, arms elongated, fingers splayed like mangrove roots, tips tapering into hooked spines. It didn't pursue. Just watched, head cocked at an impossible angle, as if savoring the taste of our terror, its mouth stretched into a crescent slit that might have been a smile. Or a promise. We spilled into the salty serenity like men fleeing a grenade blast, limbs tangling, boots scuffing the deck's non-slip tread raw. Dad clawed at the anchor line, his fingers slipping on the wet rope, the fibers groaning as if the sea itself fought to keep us tethered. When the anchor finally broke free, its surface caked in black sludge that reeked of low-tide rot, the clumps dripping like congealed blood, strands of seagrass tangled in the flukes like hair. Dad jammed the throttle forward. The engine screamed, a feral sound that drowned the island's silence, the RPM needle trembling in the red as foam boiled beneath the stern. Water churned behind us, the wake glowing faintly with bioluminescent algae, a ghostly trail that pulsed as we raced toward open water, the blue-green sparks swirling into shapes that might have been faces or hands. I gripped the gunwale, refusing to look back, but the thing's voice pursued us, crisp as a gunshot across the waves, its timbre flawless, inhumanly precise. "Come back." It shrieked, its tone now slick, almost musical, a lullaby wrapped in razor wire. "I need help." The words slithered into my ears, stripped of their earlier desperation, each vowel polished to a predatory gleam. This wasn't a plea. It was a performance, a pantomime of distress laced with a giddy, venomous edge, the sound of a child's music box cranked too fast, its melody warping into dissonance. What we encountered that night defies logic. If you're reading this, if you're skimming Florida's barrier islands at dusk, cocktails in hand, laughter spilling over the rails like something the night can't wait to devour, heed this. When the wind carries a cry from some lonely spit of sand, when your gut knots at the too perfect pitch of that "help me," do not answer. Steer clear. Flood the engine. Pray the current drags you anywhere else. Pray harder. Because whatever wears a human voice like ill-fitting skin, whatever peels back the night to show you teeth masquerading as a smile, it isn't lost. It doesn't want help. It wants you. Alive. Pleading. Afraid. "You've got to be kidding," I said to myself after taking a drink of my coffee, which had the metallic taste of copper. I slammed my mug down on my kitchen table and was met with the sound of clanking metal against the side of the cup. I knew what was in the mug but felt too frustrated to acknowledge or think about it. After a moment, I looked back at the mug. I realized it was getting absurd to have these kinds of emotions and even fear for something like this. I grabbed my now cold cup of coffee and dumped it into the sink. 2 pennies came flying out, hitting the edge of the kitchen sink. The sound of metal hitting metal bounced in my head like a haunting lullaby. Something as harmless as a penny was slowly becoming my biggest fear. What is normally seen as lucky had become the thing that would taunt me day and night. After letting my rage subside, I grabbed the pennies out of the drain, quickly walking to the nearby living room and throwing them on top of a monstrous pile of pennies currently living rent-free on my carpet. The pile mocked me. I felt so defeated. No matter what I did, more pennies just kept showing up, in stranger and stranger places. It was just weird at first, but now I can't even enjoy something as small as my cup of coffee. What did I do to ever deserve this strange curse? How many pennies would you have to find before you started to feel uncomfortable? 5? 10? Maybe 50? And what would you even do about it? Maybe tell a friend? There isn't much you could do about it, really. Just feel oddly concerned as to how you suddenly are a penny magnet. I've always been the kind of person to pick up change I see on the ground in random places. I have a little jar that I put all the loose change in and put it all in one of those little coin machines every so often to exchange for larger bills or gift cards or whatever. It always felt satisfying to see the dollar amount on the dial screen, like a small reward for always having an eye out for those little shiny coins. It's hard to say when it went from feeling like I was lucky to feeling like something was plaguing me. I remember about a year ago, going to put a handful of pennies into the jar. I had the thought of it being out of the ordinary to have so many pennies, and when I looked at the jar, I realized it was almost all pennies. It was a large jar, and I remembered emptying it just a few weeks back, yet it was filled to the brim with pennies. I took it by a coin counting machine on my way to work and was amazed. Despite it only being pennies, it was just over $100. I was more excited than confused at that moment. My excitement from making money from random coins quickly shifted. What was once finding them on the floor of my house or a cup holder in my car became finding them in the sock I've been wearing all day, or clogging up the shower drain, in my phone case, and even in a chicken nugget. Thankfully, I noticed before trying to swallow. I would tell people in my life about it and they would laugh and think it's nothing until they saw it happen firsthand. It wasn't just something that would happen in my house. It happened everywhere I went. I got in trouble at work because I kept having to dig pennies out of my computer. My coworkers got annoyed. They kept finding pennies in the coffee pot and sitting in the break room fridge. Even pennies showing up on their desks. They thought I was pulling a prank and got very annoyed after I wouldn't stop, and it only got worse. My friends would come over to see jars and buckets full of pennies that I collected over the last week or so that I hadn't had the time to take in. They would leave after the frustration of pennies showing up in their water or underwear. They somehow thought I was doing it. The thought of a penny curse was just too strange to believe. I wouldn't believe it either. Life was still moving. Despite the inconveniences that now followed me around, I managed to keep my job and keep most of my friends. Plus, I was making decent money from this. Unfortunately, the pennies became more desperate for attention just as I was getting used to them. A couple months back, I got a call from my brother-in-law. My sister had unexpectedly passed away overnight. I was in complete shock. She was young and healthy. What could have possibly killed her? They carried out a post-mortem and I couldn't believe what they found. A penny. A damn penny. Lodged in her brain. The doctor couldn't even believe it himself when he told us. Even though we have decided that the penny was the cause of death, we unfortunately have no idea how it got there. I understand she has no history of surgery on her brain or anywhere near her head. No event that could have possibly led to a coin being introduced. We saw in her record that she had an MRI a few years back for a concussion and they didn't see a coin. It somehow made its way there in the last couple of years. She should have shown signs if something was logged for a long time. He paused and moved in his chair, trying to get more comfortable, but only looked more awkward as he scooted. It almost seems like it appeared overnight. I know you want a better explanation for the loss of a family member, but something like this has never happened before. There really isn't a great explanation. I am so sorry. The fluorescent light flickered in the cold doctor's office as my family and I exchanged glances at each other. I felt a deep pit in my stomach. I killed my sister. This was all my fault. I didn't directly stick that coin in her head, but whatever was responsible for the coins wasn't happy with the torture it had brought just me so far. I knew it wouldn't take long for my family to start to blame me. I was already blaming myself. I just sat in anticipation as I waited for the whole family to point fingers at me. "Andrew, what have you done?" My mom whispered in a hoarse voice. "No, please, believe me, it didn't have anything to do with me. How on earth would I be able to do something like this on purpose?" I begged my family as the doctor felt more uncomfortable than ever. "I'm not saying you put that coin in her brain. But whatever is happening to you is now hurting the rest of us. I know you didn't do this on purpose, but I think we should keep our distance until you can figure this out," my mom said with tear-filled eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Okay, everyone needs to slow down here," the doctor added nervously. "What is this about Andrew being to blame? I need some more explanation," he said as he unclenched his fist to find 2 pennies perfectly waiting in his palm. "Wait. What the hell? How did you do that? What is happening?" He stood up in his chair and started to find pennies hiding in his clothes. He frantically grabbed 3 out of his pants pockets and threw them to the ground. Then 1 in his jacket pocket. Finally taking off his shoe and dumping 1 onto his desk. The poor man went running out of the office. "Andrew, please understand why we need our space. You saw Katie the night before she passed. We aren't saying you did this on purpose, but my dad stated as I interrupted him. "No, stop, I'll leave." I wanted to argue. I didn't want my family to abandon me, but they were right. It was unsafe for me to be around them. I was causing coins to randomly spawn near me, in a proximity that I couldn't be sure of. One thing was clear. They only appeared when I was close by. I could only keep my loved ones safe by staying away, until I could hopefully figure out what was causing this to happen. I left the doctor's office in a hurry. I felt frantic heading for my house. I knew I had to barricade myself in my house. It was hopefully far enough away from other homes or people that I wouldn't endanger anyone else. Only time would tell. I was in complete solitude, acting as if I had some kind of infectious disease that I was desperate to not spread to any unfortunate soul. Even going to the extent of quitting my job, I couldn't risk the lives of my coworkers, despite how annoying they could be. Plus, I was making so much money from the damn pennies I didn't have to work. I bought about 10 of those 5-gallon reusable water jugs you see people filling up at the grocery store. They would give me an average of $400 per jug, and I had about 3 jugs per week. Money was no issue. I put them at the end of my driveway and hired someone to take them to the coin exchange. They would bring the cash from it back to the end of the driveway, and that's the money I've been living off of. Luckily, being around the pennies themselves doesn't seem to hurt anyone. It's me that's the problem. Coming to terms with this being my new normal was hard, but I settled in. I kept trying to figure out how this was happening, but was only met with dead ends. The main way I was staying sane was by trying to find a way out of this, but nothing. I was only met with more and more pennies. It felt like I was drowning in them. They consumed me. Not being able to take a bite of food without spitting out a little copper coin. Needing to rake them out of my bed several times a night just to be comfortable enough to sleep. The laundry machine would sound like a war zone with pieces of tiny metal flying around inside of it. I could hear the sound of them in my walls as they fell on top of a bigger pile of pennies within the drywall. My time was now spent with me cleaning up pennies. Filling up countless water jugs and buckets with them in an attempt to not have my home overtaken by them. I am writing this because I believe this is the end for me. Not only is all this happening to my home, but to me. I went to scratch my wrist yesterday and my heart dropped as I grabbed it. A small round bump made its way out of my skin. The indent of a penny making itself known in my body. It was happening. The same end that came for my sister. I knew having a penny in my arm wouldn't be nearly as dangerous as the one that found its way into my sister's head, but this was the beginning. I could see this penny, but where were the other ones I couldn't see? Burrowing their way into my organs and nerves. This morning I woke up in much worse shape than I could have imagined. Multiple pennies protruding from my arms. Not just those, but I have severe pain in random places in my body. The inside of my knee, my ear, and I think, my lung. I felt a sudden gut-wrenching pain in my mouth and looked in the mirror to find a penny lodged in the side of my gum. As I lay in my bed writing this, I'm quite literally being consumed by pennies. They are covering my body at the same time they are infiltrating my body. Every hour I feel more and more random pinches of pain appear, knowing I am closer and closer to death. Now it's a waiting game to see if the weight of the copper on top of my body kills me first, or if a coin shows up in just the right spot in my body to kill me once and for all. Who knew something as lucky as a penny would be the thing to kill me in the end? My friends and I have always loved going out to the woods. It started with my friend Mark and I, going out and making small bonfires and coming home late smelling like wood smoke. We started doing this in our freshman year of high school and just kept doing it as we got older. In that time, our other friends would start accompanying us. Before long, our weekends were spent camping out in the wooded area Mark and I had found when we were just barely teens. I had found the place originally. It was a clearing about 1.5 miles into the wooded area that we all nicknamed Mockingbird Wood. It had no official name, but the first time I went out there, I noticed a mockingbird, so I figured it was a fitting name for the place. The little clearing sat circled by trees with the trail heading in going over a river where a mass of large stones created a natural bridge, and another trail heading out along a cliffside that followed the river. We would go out there and set up makeshift shelters, have bonfires, and even fished once or twice. The woods were a special place for me, like some sort of fantasy where my friends and I could have our own little world. All the man-made structures of civilization would disappear and it would just be us standing in the same surroundings as our ancient ancestors. There was something magical about that, something that felt primordial and ancient. Maybe that's why we kept going back, or maybe it had to do with our connections to each other and how that sacred place tied into them. Whatever the reason, Mockingbird Wood was special to us. When we were in our early 20s, we decided we would go out for an overnight camp out. We didn't get out as nearly as often as we used to since life demands jobs and responsibilities, but by some miracle, 6 of us found the time to hike out there and have some fun. Mark and I had sold the rest of the group on the idea, which hadn't taken much pushing. My guess is they were longing for the comfortable isolation and peace that the woods would offer. Jessie was the first one I called after talking to Mark. I had a crush on her and thought this might be a shot to make something happen with her, so I was pretty delighted when she said she was going to be there. That delight was lessened a little bit when she said she was bringing her friend Maddie along. It's not that I didn't like Maddie, but she would always draw Jessie away each time I get up the courage to try to tell her how I felt. I would later find out that Mark had called our friend Martin and his girlfriend Rachel to come with. I was pretty happy to hear Martin would be there. He was the third M after all. We called him that because Mark and I also had names that started with the letter M: Mason, Mark, and Martin. The 3MS. We rode up there Friday night, the mid-spring air neither cold nor hot and the sky devoid of any clouds to obstruct the full force of the moon and stars. I couldn't have asked for a nicer evening to return to Mockingbird Wood. I was riding along with Mark, rolling a joint for us to smoke on our way up there, when we saw Martin and Rachel on the road behind us. As Martin pulled alongside us, I sat up in my seat and dropped my pants to push my ass out the window. When I heard his horn blasting repeatedly, I knew he'd seen it and sat back down. You know he's got his girl with him, right? Mark said chidingly. Hey, if she's gonna stick around, she had better know how we get down. If she's cool, she'll think it was funny, I replied, lighting the joint and passing it Mark. You're not wrong, but maybe we should ease her into it instead of letting her see all the crazy immature shit we do at once, came his muffled follow-up as he pulled on the joint. Nah, it's like swimming, I mused. You jump in the deep end and hope you don't drown. We were still laughing about it as we pulled up to the empty field by the road where we all parked our cars before heading into the woods. Rachel and Maddie were already parked there, talking while Maddie smoked a cigarette and leaned against the back of her old Jeep. Jessie smiled and waved to us as we parked, her long brown hair bouncing side to side with each motion of her hand. Maddie looked like the opposite of her, with short blonde hair and no reaction to our arrival. We parked and Mark popped the trunk to grab the case of cheap beer he had brought, while I grabbed the high-powered flashlight laying on the floorboard in front of me. Cool, we got a full moon tonight, said Martin, looking up at the sky. I thought you saw a full moon earlier, numbnuts, I joked around, prompting a laugh from him and Mark. More like a half moon. You looked like you had 2 pale pancakes where your ass should be, dude, came Rachel's voice from the other side of Martin's car as she stepped out. Martin had done well for himself with Rachel. She was a picturesque brunette with bright blue eyes and a warm smile. I held my hands out to either side and turned towards Mark. Told you, man. I shouted. So where's this place? Maddie asked, sounding completely unamused. Just through the woods up here, answered Mark, hefting the case of natural light beer and closing the trunk. Follow me, I'll show you guys the way, I said, turning on the flashlight. It took about 20 minutes to make our way through the woods to our destination. We talked while we made the journey, my attention mostly on Jessie. "So why do you call it Mockingbird Wood?" she asked me. "Well, when I first came up here, there was mockingbird in the trees. I was whistling at it and getting it mimic me. They're cool birds, they'll even sing at night and stuff. Anyways, it was my first time being in these woods, so I named it Mockingbird because of it." She smiled at me, her eyes moving down a little and then looking back up at my face. I smiled back and opened my mouth to say something only for Maddie to cut me off. "Were you like a birdwatcher or something?" she asked in a harsh tone. "No, I just spent a lot of time outside." "Huh. Weird." I silently wished Maddie hadn't come with us and kept pushing further into the woods. After a few minutes, we came to the little river that flowed past the large walks that we used to make our way across. I crossed first to the other bank and shined my flashlight down onto the rocks so the others could make their way across. After that, we walked uphill until we leveled out and came into the clearing where I had played with a mockingbird all those years ago. Martin and Mark built a little fire where we always did, in a divot of bare earth that we dug out when we built the first one. I silently wondered how many fires we had burned there at this point and sat on one of the logs we had nearby to start rolling another joint. While I did this, Rachel pulled out a little portable speaker and started playing some music, the air filling with Out of Touch by Hall & Oates. Jessie and Maddie sat a little ways away, the crack of their beer cans opening echoing in the trees. "I like you music," said Jessie in a bubbly voice to Rachel. "Thanks, I get my tastes from my dad. Can we play some rave music after this?" Maddie cut in. "Maybe," replied Rachel with an uncomfortable expression. I was more than a little relieved to realize it wasn't just me who didn't care for Maddie. "Hey, you remember when we camped up here during the snowstorm?" Martin asked me. "Hell yeah, we made that weird hut thing and packed snow around it so it looked like igloo," I said with a grin. "Yeah, and then we hotboxed it until we couldn't breathe," Mark added, prompting us to laugh hard at the memory. "Hey, you hear that?" came Jessie's voice. "Hear what?" I queried, straining my ears. "There's a mockingbird singing," she said excitedly. Sure enough, I could hear the telltale song of a lone mockingbird looking for a mate somewhere high above us. "It's looking for a mate. They'll go on all night sometimes," I said, smiling at her and basking in the smile she reflected back at me. "Sounds exhausting," chimed Maddie, on cue. I got up, pushing down the annoyance I felt. "I got to pee real quick." "I'll be right back," I said, excusing myself. I got up and walked up the trail that ran parallel to the river. Once I was sure I was far enough away, I started doing my business. "Hey, you hear that?" I heard Jessie's faint voice drift out a little ways away. "Jessie?" I whispered into the darkness around me. "Over here," she replied a little further up the trail. I started walking that way, wondering how she had got past me without me noticing. I rounded a short bend and peered into the dark woods all around me. "I'm over here," she whispered just behind some bushes. I started pushing my way through the bushes, wishing I had the flashlight to see where I was going. "What are you doing, Dash?" That was as far as I got before my question turned into a yelp of alarm and I fell 20 feet straight down to the rocky riverbank below. I didn't shout or yell as I fell, just made a sudden gasping sound and down I went. I landed on my feet, feeling something pop and pain blossoming up through my ankle and knee and my left leg. That's when I registered what had happened and started yelling. Help! I heard my voice trill and reverberate off the trees. After a couple seconds, I heard the crash of footfalls through the overgrown vegetation accompanied by Mark's voice. Mason, he shouted. Down here. I was suddenly bathed in the bright beam of the flashlight and was able to see how my leg looked. It was bent awkwardly and already swelling badly. Stay there. I'm going to get help, he yelled down to me. Damn it, I don't have a signal out here, I heard Martin say. You'll have to go back to the cars, it's the closest place you're going to be able to make a call, I called up to them. Don't worry, Mason, I'm on it. Mark reassured me. Everyone stay here with Mason, I'll be back as fast as I can with some help. At this moment, I wasn't scared or anything, just in a lot of pain. I wanted to cry from how bad it hurt, but I was too aware of Jessie somewhere nearby and didn't want her to see me like that. Someone, toss me a beer. I called up to my friends on the ridge. A short second later, a beer landed in the mud next to me. I rinsed it off in the river and cracked it open, eliciting a blast of foam as I did so, and took a deep gulp of the carbonated beverage. Thank God, I thought I was going to be sober there for a moment, I shouted back up the ridge, prompting laughter from everyone up there. Crisis averted. I groaned in pain and rolled onto my back, using my good leg to push me up out of the water until my back was against the dirt wall behind me. I'd toss you a joint too, but it'd get wet, came Rachel's voice. It's okay, I'm still pretty high, I said in all seriousness. I even thought I heard Jessie out here earlier. I think I've been smoking too much as it is. You must have been stoned. I was with Maddie the whole time, Jessie laughed far above me. I sipped on my beer and tried to ignore the throbbing agony of my leg, wondering if I had broken it. I could feel the meat of it swelling so bad that it was making my pant leg tighter. In that moment's silence, the whole wood started to come alive with the chirps of mockingbirds. I thought I heard someone say something up above, but couldn't make it out over the sudden cacophony of birdsong. What? I shouted up to them. I said, there's a lot of mockingbirds all of a sudden, came Martin's voice. I stopped and listened as the mating calls lasted for a few minutes and died away. That was weird, I called up to them. There was no answer. Guys, you there? Yeah, we're here, just hang in there. Mark should be back soon. We waited in silence for a while. After what felt like a pain-filled eternity had passed, I shouted again to make sure they were still there, more to distract myself from the pain than to actually verify their presence. Hey, you guys didn't leave, did you? It's a mockingbird. I heard Jessie say. It's a bunch of them. Is Mark back yet? Nothing. Hey, can you hear me? You must have been stoned, Jessie laughed. Yeah, I must have been, but it's wearing off. Can one of you go check to see what's taking Mark so long? Yeah, I'll be back soon, Martin answered me, his voice sounding monotone. I figured he must be worried, so I followed up with some reassurance. Don't worry, Martin, my flat has cushioned my fall. No laughter. They must be getting worried. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as the mud leached the heat from my body. It was a mixed blessing. On the one hand, it was making me colder, but on the other, It was chilling my injured leg and surely helping with the swelling. "Don't worry, Mason. Mark will be back soon," came Maddie's worried voice. I was a little surprised to hear her actually being comforting to me, having been convinced that woman lacked any kind of empathy. "I'm not that worried, you shouldn't be either," I assured her. "Why do you call it Mockingbird Wood?" I heard Jessie ask. I figured she was trying to keep me talking to make sure I wasn't going into shock or anything. I felt a little embarrassed that I was reduced to this state in front of her, but answered her anyways. "Like I told you earlier, I was playing with a mockingbird when I first came here years ago." There was a thump in the mud next to me and I turned to see another beer sticking up halfway out of the mud. "Thanks." I hollered up to them and took the beer, downing the rest of my open one. The alcohol was helping to ease the pain a little bit, so I decided another one would be a welcome addition. "Seriously, where's Mark and Martin?" I asked, starting to get nervous. "It's a mockingbird," said Jessie again. "Why do you keep saying that?" I asked politely, hiding the fact that I was getting frustrated. Before she could answer me, I heard Rachel's voice. "I get my taste from my dad." I got quiet. Something felt off. I shook my head, wondering if maybe I was just concussed. "Guys, maybe I'm just messed up, but you're acting weird." "I'd toss you a joint too, but it'd get wet," Rachel said in response. "What?" I asked in pure confusion. "Sorry, just trying to think of ways to help." Rachel continued. "I'm not sure how that helps," I said, feeling a little drunk. "It's a mockingbird," Jessie said again. I was starting to get creeped out. I pulled out my phone, planning to use the light on it to look around, but it was either damaged or dead. What's taking Mark and Martin so fucking long? One of them should have come back by now. "Don't worry, Mason," I heard Mark saying. "Oh, thank God. I was getting worried for a moment there," I laughed. "Everyone stay here, I'll be back with some help," he said. "What the fuck, Mark? I thought you already went to get some help," I asked. "It's a mockingbird," Jessie intoned. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted. "It's okay," came Maddie's voice, making my blood run ice cold. Her voice didn't come from above me. It came from the dark on the opposite river bank. "Maddie, how did you get down here?" "It's a mockingbird," Jessie's voice answered from the same place. I yelped in pain as I tried to scramble to my feet and failed. There was no physical way Jessie could have gotten down here that fast. "Stay the fuck away from me." "Don't worry, Mason," I heard Mark say. "You're not Mark," I shouted at the dark patch of wood across from me. "Remember that time we camped here during a snowstorm?" Not Martin asked me. "Yeah, and hotboxed it," non-Mark added. "Help. Get away from me," I shouted, throwing my half-full beer can as hard as I could in the direction of the voices. There was a thump in the mud next to me and another beer can landed. "Stop fucking with me, damn it," I screamed. "It's a mockingbird," not Jessie yelled from across the river. I tried to stand again, my feet trying to function and only succeeding in pushing myself halfway up the dirt wall at my back and sliding back down. The trees above me broke out in the cacophony of mockingbird mating calls again, drowning out every other noise around me. I saw some movement in the shadows across the river and hurled a still unopened can of beer in that direction, hearing it make a heavy clang as it made contact with something. The roar of anger cut through the sound of the birds, which fell silent after. "It's a mockingbird," I heard it say in Jesse's voice again. "Yeah, I get it, it's a fucking mockingbird. Help me. Anyone." I shouted out into the empty woods. The minutes seemed to stretch out forever. I wasn't even sure how long I had been down there anymore. I tried to stand up for the third time and managed to get my good leg underneath me. However, I didn't really know where I could go. The river was shallow enough that I could wade across it, but God knows I didn't want to be on the other bank with whatever was over there. I certainly couldn't make it up the sheer cliff behind me. That left only one other option: following the river. I waded out into the cold water, hearing something stir in the woods on the other side as I moved. "I'll be back as fast as I can with help," came Mark's voice, moving along with me from the shadows across the river. "It's a mockingbird," came Jesse's voice above me again. "I'm coming back with a gun. How's that for help, you assholes?" I yelled stupidly into the dark, hearing my voice vanishing among the uncaring trees. I trudged my way painfully through the water, unable to bend the knee of my left leg. Each painful movement forward made me gasp through my gritted teeth as I moved. In some spots, the river came up to my neck, making me wonder if I was going to have to try to swim with my lame leg dragging me down. Thankfully, it never got any deeper than that. At one point, the mud of the river bottom sucked one of my shoes in so deep that I couldn't free it. It was holding my busted leg in place, which didn't have the strength in it to yank the shoe free, so I slipped it off and kept going. "Help!" I heard a new voice say. I froze, realizing I was hearing my own voice repeating back to me. Whatever was stalking me, it was keeping right along the river bank, not leaving my side for a second. "It's a mockingbird," came Jesse's voice above me. "You must have been stoned," came Jesse's voice across the river. I didn't respond and kept pushing forward, wondering what I would do when I got to the rocks we had used as a bridge to cross the river. At that point, I have to cross to head back on land, and I didn't think I'd stand much chance there with my leg being the way it was. "It's a mockingbird, mockingbird, mockingbird," came not Jesse's voice from the river bank. I pushed forward again and felt my hand brush one of the large stones in the river. In the moonlight, I could make out the trail on either side of me painted in silvery hues. I leaned back, trying to my head as close to the water as I could. I reached down, patting my hand along the riverbed until I felt the hard edges of a fist-sized stone. As quietly as I could, I lifted it up out of the river and flung it as far away into the river ahead of me as I could. It made a loud splash, and the entire wood erupted into birdsong again. I could make out something moving quickly towards where the stone had landed, leaving the bank seemingly clear. "It's a mockingbird," I heard further down the river. Realizing I wasn't going to get a better shot, I lifted myself from the water as quietly as I could and started limping towards the entrance of the woods. I did my best to be quiet, but with my legs so badly injured, it was slow going. I gritted my teeth and did my best to not grunt in pain as I hobbled my way along. I had been hobbling for a few minutes when I heard a voice a ways back behind me call out, "Don't worry, Mason. I'll be as fast as I can," came Mark's voice. I started hobbling faster, still trying not to make too much noise. "It's a mockingbird," I heard the fake Jesse say, a little bit closer. I started hopping on my good foot, lurching painfully as I willed my body forward despite the pain. The uneven ground threatened to topple me with every movement in the darkness, but I kept going. Finally, I saw a beam of light up ahead and felt a momentary glimmer of hope. That hope vanished when I reached it though. It was the flashlight. The one Mark had taken with him. It was laying on the forest floor, shining into nothing. I picked it up as I felt something wet land on my neck. I looked up and saw Mark's body, horribly maimed and suspended in the trees above. His legs and arms were twisted and his face half tore off. I would have screamed if I wasn't too scared to do so. "Stay there." I heard Mark's voice call out from behind me. It was getting even closer. I thought fast and hurled the flashlight as hard as I could into the woods off to my left. I then resumed my hopping gait, trying like hell to get out of the woods as fast as my ruined leg would allow. Behind me, I heard something big tear into the undergrowth where I had thrown the flashlight. I had bought myself a little time, but only a little. I kept going, each movement sending fresh waves of pain radiating throughout my left side. I was almost ready to give up, to just lay down and try to allow whatever this thing was to kill me as fast as possible when I saw the trees give way to open air. "It's a mockingbird," I heard behind me as I forced my leg to keep moving. "Can we play some rave music after this?" came Maddie's voice. "I get my taste from my dad," chimed not Rachel. "I'll be fast," came Mark's voice. "We got a full moon," said not Martin. "Down here," said my own voice. I stumbled out into the field and, despite incredible pain, ran to Mark's car. Every step made me scream in agony, which the voices behind me mimicked perfectly. It sounded like an entire crowd was behind me now. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door, waiting for whatever it was out there to catch up. It never did. I sat there, shivering and watching the woods unblinkingly. After a long time of sitting there in silence, I heard a voice call out from the darkness of the woods. "There's a mockingbird singing." I heard Jesse's voice say, followed by Maddie's voice saying, "Sounds exhausting." Then nothing. I shivered there all night, watching as the sun lazily rose up over the horizon. As the sunrise broke over the land, I saw a lone car winding up the road and jumped out to wave it down. The old man driving it let me use his phone to call the police and then gave me a ride back into town. Later on, they'd say it was a bear that attacked and killed my friends. Their bodies were found mutilated up in the woods, or what was left of them. They tried to tell me I must have imagined everything, but I know I didn't. Still, I didn't push the issue because I didn't want to end up institutionalized, and I couldn't make things right from inside an asylum. I miss Mark. I miss Martin. I miss Jesse and Rachel. Hell, I even miss that bitch, Maddie. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about them and wondered what the hell really killed them. Maybe that's why I'm here now. I'm parked outside the entrance to Mockingbird Wood. The sun is setting and I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I have a shotgun filled with slugs sitting on my lap and I'm sending this off in case I don't come back. When I was in the river, I told those things I was coming back with a gun, and I don't intend to be a liar about it. I hope they remember how I screamed in pain running for the car. I hope they remember I'll make that sound again. If they don't, I'm going to remind them. Looking out into the street sitting there as the cars would pass by, people walking by looking at me with a silent stare. without one of them even saying a word to me, probably wondering the same thing that I was wondering. Who was I? Who was I? Where was I? For the feeling of shock and horror that would follow for the moment, it had not really begun to set in yet. For something deep down just did not feel right to me, as for I was just still waking up from the realization of what was happening. Wanting to scream out, but everything in me was still very much dark, sitting there alone, cold and wet, thinking to myself, what was I doing sitting there in the rain, not remembering anything? Unable to remember anything at all, as the feeling of loneliness began to set in, the feeling of being alone, of being abandoned, for as the people would walk by, a stranger I was to them as they were strangers to me. Wondering to myself, how did I get here? What has happened to me? As fear and shock was slowly beginning to take place, along with the feeling of being lost. As I sat there looking down at my rain-soaked clothes, or at least what I had on, which was only a t-shirt and bed pants, not to mention that I had no shoes or socks on. With no indication of where I was or where I came from, only knowing that I was here sitting in the rain looking at people as they passed by me, with no one stopping to even say a word to me, with nobody really showing that they even cared. Except one man who approached me asking, "What have we here? Little girl, what are you doing out here, sitting out here in the rain in your pajamas?" Looking into his eyes with fear, the only thing I could say was, "I don't know where I am, or do I remember anything?" Placing his hands on my shoulder, he assured me that he would try his best to help me out, with him then telling me that his name was Azazel, letting me know that he was the town's local sheriff and that he would try to help me. Making my way slowly up to my feet, as I got up to follow the sheriff, I noticed a guy standing across the street from me, just standing there staring at me. With an eerie feeling suddenly coming over me, I just shrugged it off, not thinking much about it at the moment. As we walked down the street to the police station, sitting down with me, he then proceeded to ask me to try to remember what I could. But before I could say anything at all, I found myself looking straight into a fogged-up window. Seeing a word begin to appear. As it came into focus, it read, "Alone." Seeing that the same man from earlier this time was standing out from the window, just standing there staring at me. Not moving, just standing there with a dead stare. With the feeling of fear coming over me, standing up, looking to the sheriff, screaming to him, "I just want to go home." Home I didn't remember, for everything was gone to me, for I was alone, having tears coming down my face, with Sharif saying to me, "Look, I am going to help you, but for now you need to calm down." Placing his hand on my hand, saying to me, "For now let's get you something to eat, and then we will go from there. Till then there is a bathroom over there if need." Making my way into the bathroom, standing there looking into the mirror, a feeling of dread suddenly came over me. With the feeling of I wasn't alone in there, looking slowly around me, looking into the mirror. For standing there looking into the mirror, I saw a young girl with long blonde hair, with blue eyes, looking at me, with her age looking in between that early 20s or 30s. Trying my best to remember anything, when suddenly a voice whispered to me saying, "Forever her." Jumping back, screaming, "Who was there?" Whispering again, saying, "Forever alone." Screaming as I ran out of the bathroom, out the police station, into the rain, looking in every which direction. Just as the sheriff ran out and grabbed me by my shoulders, with me yelling, "I just want to go home. I just want to go home." Falling to my knees just as the sheriff placed both of his hands on my shoulders, saying, "Look, I am going to do my best to help you, but you have to help me by staying calm." reassuring me everything is going to be alright, everything is going to be alright. Standing up, I looked to the Sharif with tears in my eyes saying, "Thank you." With the Sharif looking at me saying, "Now let's go and get you something to eat, and get you drying out of this rain here. There is a good diner across the street in front of us." Walking across the street, I noticed the guy that watching me from earlier was now finally gone. Walking in, no one inside seemed familiar to me, unlike the Sharif, as he greeted almost everyone in the place. Wishing I could remember anything at this point, but nothing but emptiness inside me, with nothing but loneliness. As we sat down, a man entered into the diner carrying what seemed to a paper of some kind, holding it up, showing it to everyone that he came in contact with. Approaching us, showing the Sharif a picture saying, "Sharif, please, my boy is missing, have you seen him?" With the Sharif replying, "He does look familiar, I may have seen him earlier, afraid, but I will keep an eye out for him. One of my deputies will help you fill out a missing person report." As the man started to walk away, he then turned to me. Looking at me, I could see a tear running down his cheek, showing me the picture of his son, asking me if I had seen him, saying to him, "I am sorry, I don't know who he is. I don't even know who I am." Just as a cold chill then came with the sound of laughter only I could hear, as the feeling of loneliness hit me even harder this time. As I then looked to the man, as tears began to flow from him as he stood there saying, "I don't understand what happened to him. We are a very caring family that loves one another very much." Looking at him with sadness, I told him that I hope you are able to find your son, as he then thanked me and the Sharif. Slowly he walked away, thinking to myself, would he find his son, and would I find my own family? Later, we was making our way to the hospital. I found myself looking out at the houses as we passed by them, wondering to myself, could one of them be mine? As we drove down the road, looking out at the people as we passed by them, looking at them, wondering to myself if I had a family, a mom, a dad, or brother, or a sister, someone to call my own, someone to call family. Was someone missing me, or was there no one there to miss me? Looking out at the houses, I also saw houses that had a look of emptiness to them, with no one there. I saw them as abandoned, forgotten about, thinking that no one cared, that maybe I was abandoned, forgotten about, and no one cared for me, just as the sign on the side of the road read, "One way." For there was only one way for me to know, and that was to remember feeling abandoned and forgotten about. That was my memory for me. Pulling into the hospital, getting out, we then made our way into the hospital. As we then sat down, a woman then approached us, not knowing who she was. The Sharif leaned towards me saying, this was Nurse Jennifer, that she was going to try to help me. That name would later come to forever haunt me. Grabbing my hand, she then asked me to try to see if I could remember anything at all, anything. Closing my eyes, trying to think back, just as an image then began to appear, an image of me standing in front of a mirror. Standing there looking into the mirror, trying to remember it, all I could see was an image. An image of me smiling, grinning back at me. But the only thing was, and that I was not smiling, but the reflection was. Letting out a scream as the nurse then placed her hands on my cheeks, turning to the Sharif saying, "It is best that she spends the night here, and we will go from there." Looking at me, she said, "I assure you that we will find answers for you, and that everything was going to be okay, but for now we're going to have you spend the night here." As we got up to head to the room, the Sharif then placed his hand on my shoulder, looking at me with a grin, saying to me, "Everything is going to be okay. I now need you to stay here tonight. Now do your best for Jennifer here, and she will take care of you. Oh, and one last thing, I will see you later." Looking at the Sharif as he made his way to the exit, I thought to myself, everything will be okay, I hope. Making our way to the room with Jennifer, looking inside of the other rooms, some were empty and some had people. but a few rooms I could see only had one person with no visitors. I could not help but to think to myself, "Oh, I get a visitor, will someone come looking for me?" As I looked into one room, I saw an old man sitting there in his bed, looking out of his window out into a world of memories. Thinking to myself, did he have anyone, or is he alone? As I thought that to myself, he then looked at me and smiled. He then spoke to me with a tear in his eye, saying, "Hello, young lady, how you doing today?" Smiling back to him, I replied, "I could be better." Smiling back to me as he then looked away from me, looking out of window into the world for which he would soon leave. But then he suddenly looked back at me, smiling and grinning, saying to me, "Memories. I have a lot of memories of my life, memories that I cherish, memories of my childhood. Memories that you will never get back. Why did you do it? What was you looking for? What was you hoping for?" Jumping back startled, I thought to myself, what was he saying? Why did he speak to me, telling me, asking me these things? Quickly grabbing Jennifer as I pointed to the old man, with Jennifer then grabbing me, saying, "Wait right here," as she walked over to him. All of a sudden she called for assistance. Other nurses came walking into the room, with Jennifer walking out the room over to me, saying, "Let's get you to your room." Thinking about the old man as we walk into the room, thinking about what he had said, I asked Jennifer if he was all right. With Jennifer looking at me, grabbing my hand, telling me that he had passed away, that he was already gone. When I pointed at him, from that moment I was not able to even think of anything, as Jennifer handed me a hospital gown to put on. She then placed her hand in my cheek, saying to me, "I know you are scared right now. I know that you are thinking about the old man, but you have to know that things like that happen here. You want to think that life goes on, that life continues. It's hard, I know, but you need to get some rest, and tomorrow I will come back to check on you. But for now, if anyone, just press the call button and someone will come." Looking at Jennifer with a smile as I lay back on my pillow as she then left the room. Thinking to myself, maybe in the morning when I wake that my memories would return. Looking out of the window into the night sky as I fell asleep, I dreamed that I was standing there looking out of the window out into the night sky, with all of its stars looking back at me. But if in the distance in the distance, walking closer to it, I could see people in it, laughing, playing, enjoying each other's company. As the sun starting to rise, shining bright upon the house, I could feel the warmth of love as it radiated around me. As I walked inside, I saw a man and woman and child standing there smiling at me. With man standing with his back to me, covering his face as he cried, I could feel sadness as it filled the room. Recognizing the man from the diner as they began to speak, asking me, "Why did you leave? Where did you go? We were worried for you." I then looked at them and asked, "Who am I to you? Who was I? And are you my family?" With the woman smiling as she cried, looking at me and saying to me, "Why did you do it? What was hoping for? What was you looking for?" Just then little boy looked up to me, saying, "But you promised that you would never leave, that you would be here for me as I grew up." With tears now running down my face, he then asked me, "Do you not love me no more? Did I not mean anything to you?" Falling to my knees, trembling, reaching with my hands out to him, saying, "Please tell me who I was to you. Please, are you my family?" Just another voice came to me, a deeper, darker voice, saying, "But this is what you wanted, this is what you asked for." With me screaming, "What do you mean is this is what I wanted? Why did you ask me this? Tell me." Just as the light outside began to turn to darkness, with a smile and a grin, they all three looked at me and said, "You will never know us again, you will never see us again." As they kept repeating it over and over again, smiling and laughing at me, saying, "You did what you did. You done what you done, now you will never know us again. You will never see us again, for alone you will forever be in a life, living a life of never knowing who you are. Only knowing that you are the one who you are now. For when you looked into the mirror and saw the person standing there before you, forever you will be that person. For what you did will never be undone. With one smile from them, with one last look, I woke screaming and yelling. What did I do? What did I do? Please tell me. Just as the nurses came running into the room, grabbing hold of me, trying to calm me down. Just as jumped up screaming, running out into the hall, running for the door. Not knowing where I was going, but only knowing I had to get there for me to know what did I do? What did I do? Running out the hospital I did not, running in screaming, thinking of the dream. Who was they? I thought of the Sharif and of Jennifer, on whether they could really help me. As I continued to run, not knowing where I was going, but knowing something had to happen. Coming to a stop, falling to the ground, screaming. What did I do? Looking around, I saw a church, slowly making my way, dragging my body onto the concrete steps as I cried, as I screamed. Help me. Help me, please, God, help me. Please, would someone, anyone help me? Inching closer to the door, my cries grew louder. Please, I beg of you, help me. Help me. With my voice lowering as my cries for help grew softer, fighting back the tears, begging, pleading, with all I had left, I cried out. Don't leave me here like this, please, don't leave me here like this. I beg of you, I plead of you, please help me. As tears ran down my face, thinking to myself, as laid there saying to myself, I don't want to be alone, please, does anyone care? I don't want to die alone. Laying there on the church steps, I could take no more, with every thought that went through my mind, thinking of what did I do. I then begun to shout. Please tell me, what did I do, please? A few minutes had passed and I had come my wits end, screaming and shouting as I cried, what did I do? Would you please tell me what I did? As I laid there with my arms reaching out towards the sky above me. As the tears flowed onto the concrete steps under me, I could feel myself slowly losing everything around me. Laying there thinking to myself, is there any help? Was there any help for me? Or was I just to let go of everything, knowing everything I was, everything I knew, everyone around me was gone to me? As I passed out on the church steps, as I dreamed, I could see an individual walking slowly up to me as an eeriness surrounded him. With the feeling of all hope was lost to me as he got closer to me. But then silence as he stood there looking at me. With his eyes that seemed a solid white from a distance, now a pitch black, feeling a void from within him held no escape. The darkness surrounding him, with the void of any light behind him, I could feel pain, agony, loneliness, fear as it takes over you, covering every inch of you. With all hope leaving you with feeling of being lost forever in a darkness that you will never see any light of any kind again. As the fear began to grow worse over me, as loneliness, real loneliness, began to set in, as he then began to speak, saying to me, is this not what you wanted? It is what you wrote. Replying to him, what did I write? What did I want? As he stood there motionless, just staring at me with his darkened eyes, saying to me, I will temporarily open your mind to yet you see for yourself. For what did you see when you looked into the mirror? Trembling as I could feel my mind slowly coming back to me, I could see myself sitting at a desk looking at a picture of a girl. The girl that I was now. Seeing myself standing in front of a mirror, looking closer, I saw what was written on the mirror. Your soul you sold for her. For her you are. For I was now the girl in photo, remembering me running from out of the bathroom, running out into the rain, finding myself while I was on the sidewalk. With my mind and memories now open to me, I now knew what I asked for. But what was next for me? What do I do now? Looking at me with a blank stare, the being then spoke to me, saying, "For you think we answer all requests? Do you think everyone that sells their soul always gets what they want?" Laughing at me as he then continued to speak, saying, "If 1,000 people sold their souls to us to be a billionaire, all we have to do is to float them a single idea. Then the one who acts on it gets it, maybe. As for the rest, well, they get to live for now till we take them. For you see, we really do not have to do anything for anyone at all, for all we need to do is to keep you asking for it. To make you want it more and more, giving you just enough to keep you in our grasp. To keep you from the truth, to keep you from what once was true to you. For in the end, all we have to do is nothing. For how can you sell something that is already ours? For if you do not serve a purpose to us, then why would we even bother with you at all?" Looking at him, I ask, "Then why me? Why did you answer my request?" With a laugh, the being spoke to me, saying, "Simple, to break your mother and father's faith. To bring pain to them, to watch them as they lose faith by not knowing what happened to you. For once you truly walked with the one above, but that changed when we was just simply put a single thought into your mind, a dream." Laughing as then spoke one last thing, saying, "And to just watch you as you hopelessly lost your mind over time. For as you are now, cast out from the people you shall be. A stranger you will be to them. Alone you will remain till we come for you. Then begins the real pain." Laughing, he vanished back into the night. I just sat there thinking to myself, everything that I lost, everything I was. Everyone around me that knew me, loved me, now forever gone from me. Knowing now that there was nobody coming for me, knowing there was no help for me, I was alone. For the very thing that gave me my identity, I sold to be who I am now, a girl. Forever lost to the world, and world where I had no identity, thinking to myself, strangers they are to me, and a stranger to them I am. For I have become a stranger in the very town I lived in, a town that I grew up in. But just as I felt my memory began to go, I knew that the life that I knew, the life that I lived, would be no more. But even worse, just before my memory left, one thought was left. As I sat there on the steps of the church, and that the young man in the picture that the man was holding in the diner was me, and the man was my father. Screaming out, "No!" Just as my memories left me forever, my last thought was I was forever alone. Sundays were always slow at the plant. She was covering the day shift of one of her coworkers who had left early the day before and called out today. At this time on a usual Sunday, she would usually be laying on her comfy couch, watching videos on the internet, chain smoking cigarettes, and chain drinking cups of coffee. Today, however, she was sitting in an average office chair, watching security cameras, taking a smoke break every hour or so, still chain drinking cups of coffee, but it was regular office coffee, not the tasty stuff she had at home. Aside from the occasional truck, a couple patrols, and answering alarms set off by the strong winds, the Sunday shift was 10 hours of downtime, which is good for a security guard. Boring days were a good thing. When things were exciting, it's usually something bad, a chemical leak leading to a plant-wide evacuation, an on-the-job injury, a hostile contractor not following the rules, a disgruntled former employee. All exciting, all bad news. "Is it cold in here, or is it just me?" her coworker said, getting up to check the thermostat. "It's not too bad," she said, "and I'm usually the one who's always cold. 70 degrees. Yesterday it was like 65 in here and I was fine. Why am I so cold today? He said, putting on his coat. Ha, that's weird. She said. We can bust out a heater if you want. Nah. He said, sinking into his chair. Well, I'm heading out on my drive. Call me if you start dying. She laughed. Yeah, all right. He said from behind the eye collar of his coat. While she drove, she kept an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. She got out a couple of times to make sure doors were locked, but she mostly just meandered through the plant in the security truck. The AC in the truck felt nice. It was starting to get hotter outside. She pulled into the parking spot an hour and a half later and walked into the post. It was warm. When she checked the thermostat, it said 78. He was sitting in front of the computer desk, the monitors showing the views of cameras placed around the plant. He was still bundled up in his coat. You doing okay, man? Dude, I was keeping an eye on your patrol, then things started going all spinny with shapes. What are those things called? He held up his hands to his face like he was looking through a telescope. Kaleidoscope. She said. Yeah. Whenever I move my head it gets like that. He said. And my fingers are like ice cubes. Maybe just take it easy for a bit, I'll hold down the fort. As she began to put the report for her patrol into the post computer, she could hear the sound of steady breathing. She turned around and saw that he had nodded off. If he wants to try and stick it out, I'll let him get a quick nap and see how he's doing, she thought. It's a slow Sunday anyway. There only needed to be 2 guards on duty at a time so that the post wasn't left unattended while one guard was out on patrol. It was a good place to work if you are the type of person who doesn't like being around lots of people, the downside being that you are around that one person 10 hours a day, for days a week. It can be torture if you're stuck with someone you don't get along with. Luckily, they got along great, even played games outside of work sometimes. She couldn't hear the shallow breaths of sleep. She turned around, still in his chair, bundled up in his coat. Hey, Rise and Sheen. I know you're not feeling good, but I can't have you sleeping on me too long, she laughed. No response. No breathing. She got up, walked across the room and shook his shoulder. Dude, come on. When I said you could take it easy, I didn't mean. He slumped off the chair, falling hard onto the floor of the post. Fuck, she leaned down and lightly slapped his face. You still with me? Hey, he was non-responsive. She checked for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was pale and freezing and his lips were starting to turn purple. She ran to the phone and put it on speaker as she called the emergency number. Because they were out in the middle of nowhere, the plant had full-time emergency response team staff members with an ambulance on site in case of emergencies. Emergency operations. What's your emergency? Yeah, this is the guard post. The other guard on duty fell out of his chair. He's got no pulse, his skin's cold, he's not breathing. Emergency responders are heading your way. Do you know CPR? She was already kneeling over to her friend on the floor. Chest compressions, 2 inches deep, staying alive. She shouted towards the phone. Just keep that up until the emergency responders arrive and they'll take over. When she put her interlaced hands on his chest and started pushing down, something felt wrong. He was a heavier guy, but was he supposed to feel this squishy? His body was giving way under her hands, and with each press she could swear she could see his head bulging. With the feeling of his body's reaction to the chest compressions combined with his temperature, she couldn't help but to imagine his organs suspended in strawberry milkshake. "Something's wrong," she yelled at operator on the phone. "He feels weird." "What do you mean?" "Weird how?" the emergency operator said. "Like a milkshake." "What?" There was a sickening pop followed by the sound of thick splashing. His head had ruptured, spilling its contents onto the floor of the post. The bits of skull and brain matter had become frozen crystalline masses and had shattered into pieces. The blood that had sprayed out was melting on the warm floor. More blood that had only just started to crystallize was slowly sloshing out from the flaps of pale skin and hair that were the only thing left of her friend's head. Not a milkshake, she thought. A slushy. She started screaming. She sat down hard on the floor and pushed herself away from the popped body, stopping only when her back slammed against the cabinet. The tears that had been building up in her eyes from the panic and adrenaline started flowing down her face. She heard the person on the phone yelling something. "He's dead. He's fucking dead. Dude just popped, what the fuck?" she yelled at the phone. "Help is on the way, you need to calm down and take a breath." She turned her head and threw up. Then she heard a squelching sound and the sound of wind chimes. She wiped the vomit from her mouth and the tears from her eyes and looked at him. Something inside his body was moving. She started screaming again. A large, bloody, opalescent beak wiggled its way out of the hole in the floppy husk of her coworker. The skin of his body stretched and cracked as a large bird was being born from the remains of her exploded friend. The further it emerged, the colder the room got, with frost quickly forming on the windows and the moisture in the air becoming shimmering snowflakes. The sound coming from it was the squawking chirps of a newborn bird combined with the clinking and shattering of ice. Its wings were flexible icicles that made the sound of wet glass as the creature slapped against the floor trying to get purchase. The blood sublimated off its body, revealing translucent feathers casting caustics throughout the room as the light caught them. Slender crane-like legs were capped with webbed human feet, barbed talons jutted from the tips of its toes and hooked into the flesh of the neck and shoulders as it struggled to free itself from the icy corpse. Plumes of fog billowed from her mouth as she screamed. She felt her skin tingle and then burn from the cold. Her extreme ties began to discolor, her lips chapped and split, the streaks of tears on her face froze before they could roll off her chin. Struggling to breathe in the ice-cold air with her frostbitten lungs, she stopped screaming. The world around her became kaleidoscopic. The optical caustics from the phoenix's body dancing on every surface, the shifting prismatic fractals of the snowflakes hanging silently in midair, the warm light rays of the sun mixing with the cool light of the fluorescent tubes above her. All of these danced within the crystallizing jelly of her eyes. The beauty of it mesmerized her in that moment. Her skin froze, her blood solidified, her organs stopped, and her brain function ceased. You don't really go looking for anything, you mindlessly scroll for hours and hours as you consume content by the handful. TikTok and YouTube Shorts have allowed us to devour as much or as little as we want to, and I've opened up new worlds for us as we sit comfortably on our couch or lay in bed fighting sleep. Before TikTok, I had no idea about all the kooky things people could get up to or all the fascinating skills you could learn through storytelling. Doomsday prepping, making your own solar panels, how to dye your pets different colors, ways to grow vegetables in different climates, and that was just a handful of the things I ran across. There was a lot of brain rot in there too, but that was just the price you paid for the useful bits that you ran across. That was how I stumbled across The Wild Man. The Wild Man was a TikTok channel about a guy who lives rough out in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. The place he lives really doesn't have a name. He just calls it the Pine Barrens, and he lives in a little tent in the woods with his pet raccoon, Scampers. He hunts and fishes, and mostly just survives off the land, laying back supplies for winter every year. You wouldn't have thought it would be terribly interesting, but he does so many cool survival things, and he has the most soothing voice you've ever seen come out of a man his size. He starts every video standing in front of the camera with his clothes made out of buckskin and a ridiculous-looking coonskin cap on his head that probably started life as one of Scamper's relatives, waving and smiling his gap-toothed smile. "Well, hello there, forest friend," he would say as he waved at us. Forest friends is what he always calls the viewers in his videos, and some of them have even put it on t-shirts they sell on his behalf. It sure did rain buckets last night, so today we're gonna go check on the catch barrels and see how much rainwater we've got for the coming month. He stepped forward and grabbed the camera as he headed off into the woods and went around his campsite to check the large wooden barrels that he used to collect rainwater. One of the previous videos had shown him making the barrels, and they looked like the big cask that people store wine and beer in. He had 5 of them, and most of them were almost completely full of rainwater after the rainstorm ASMR he had done the night before. He smiled, telling us how this would be great for the coming hot months when the rain was a little scarce. He sealed up 3 of them, burying them half in the ground, before saying goodbye and hoping we'd take care of ourselves until next time. Most of his content was like that. Just very chill forest things while he and his raccoon pet went about their day-to-day activities. They fished, they collected bird eggs, and he showed us how to track deer by their sign, and how to build fires that wouldn't get out of hand. He cooked meals with the things he scavenged, meat mostly, and I was surprised at the amount of edible plants he taught me about. His content wasn't unique by any stretch of the imagination, but I really loved to watch it when I found he had a new video. He had longer videos on YouTube where he taught people how to do survival things, but I found myself mostly consuming his TikToks because I could binge watch them in under an hour. His voice was nice to listen to, and I've actually tried a few of the things that he talked about doing at his little campsite. The bucket on my back porch is growing a good crop of worms, and the rainwater collector in my backyard is watering my homemade garden nicely, so don't tell the government because I'm pretty sure that's illegal. I wondered when I first discovered him how he got the things he used, and he must have read my mind because he had a video about going into town and trading some of the things he made for money and supplies. He must have made a decent living at it because he also had a P.O. box where people sent him things. He slept in a tent that was graded for conditions in Everest because a fan had thought he might need some help through the cold months. He had a Coleman stove that he cooked on sometimes, also provided by a fan, and there were various other things that he had that he certainly hadn't foraged for. I suppose that there was also the cell phone that he shot his videos on, too, though that was a mystery we would soon solve, to our detriment and his. It started innocently enough with something I thought had just been a mistake on my part. "Well, hello, forest friends," he said one day, his shirt off and his arms slimy with clay. "I'm just making some bowl if you'd like to join me." Heck yeah, I thought, as I settled in to watch him make clay bowls. He had some clay that I imagined he had found by the river, and as he formed and molded it, I noticed something in the background. It was hard to see, kind of a nothing discovery, but it was a shoe sitting beside his tent. Not just any shoe either, but a Nike running shoe. I don't know why it seemed to stand out to me, but I rewound the video a couple of times to look closer at it. The shoe was too small to be his. The wild man wore size 14s and often complained that he had to get deer hides for moccasins about twice a year, and this looked like it would have barely covered the big old toes he now had on display as he worked. What's more, I thought there was some discoloration on the shoe, something dark, but I couldn't see it well enough to be sure. Wildman made about 8 big balls, saying he would make lids for them and seal food in them, before telling us to take care of ourselves and be respectful of nature when we had reason to be within her. The forest can be dangerous for those who don't show it respect, he added, looking good-naturedly at the camera. I thought, that was a new one. I went back to doom scrolling. I had 3 more hours of work to get through and my work hadn't quite filled the day like they had planned. I went to his profile and it seemed the wild man had been quite busy that day. He had about 10 new videos out since yesterday, and I watched him hunt for a couple of deer, fish some, play with scamper, smoke the fish and deer that he caught, do an ASMR in the middle of the night, and go for a walk after dark as the crickets and the nightbirds called all around him. The videos, to me at least, didn't feel like they were in order. I thought that the hunting videos seemed to be in the early morning, the fishing in mid-morning, and the cooking was early afternoon. That wasn't weird in of itself. People upload videos all the time that aren't in order, but it was the comments on the cooking video that made me stop and scroll a bit. He had fish crisping on sticks after he had prepared them, and deer meat sitting on a rock as he prepared to salt and store it, but then there was something on another rock near the deer meat. It didn't look the same. It looked, in fact, like pork. Some of his subs thought the same thing and they asked what tree he had found the bacon on. The wild man had commented that it was just deer meat from an earlier kill, but some hunters said that if it was deer meat then they wouldn't eat it because it didn't look right. Too pale, the comments said, but the wild man told them it had tasted fine. A little strange, but nothing to write home about, and certainly nothing to keep people awake at night. No, the thing that kept me awake was what I found on his YouTube channel. The video of him walking in the woods was the usual 5 minutes of him crunching along through the leaves, stopping to listen to the quiet nighttime sounds around him, and then progressing on before repeating it. He would point out the sounds of frogs and crickets, small birds and night creatures, and then move on through the crispy brush to find his next stop. At the end of the TikTok, there was a message that said I could watch the whole 3-hour video on YouTube, so I clicked over to his channel and put it on in the background while I worked on some last-minute paperwork. I liked having noise while I worked. It made me more productive, I think. So I listened to his big old deerskin moccasins as they crunched through the underbrush, talking about birds and squirrels and frogs as I put numbers into a report and information into a PowerPoint that would go along with it. About an hour and 45 minutes in, he stopped suddenly and gasped quietly. Who could be out here during such a dry season? With a fire too? Man, what are they thinking? He started walking again and I looked down to find him creeping up on a campfire out in the woods. The crunching was done and I realized that it had been for the benefit of the video. He could be damn near silent when he wanted to be, and as he snuck up on the campers, I let my fingers rest on the keyboard. There were 2, both sitting around a healthy-looking fire and cooking hot dogs. They were laughing, listening to music, and he hovered on the edge of their campsite and watched them. They were being too loud to hear him. He could have probably started running, and he moved back some before moving the camera up to his face. Sorry, forest friends, but I need to call tonight's walk a little early. I need to have a word with some less than courteous forest friends and let them know this isn't the burning season. Till next time, take care of yourself and be safe. He ended the video there and hadn't answered any of the comments on the video. People wanted to know what had happened and if he had scared them off. They wanted to know if he had called the police or the park rangers to enforce the burn ban. Some of them, jokingly, asked if he had just killed them and put their fire out, but these were mostly treated as a joke. Wildman, despite his name, was pretty peaceful and generally didn't interact with people any more than he had to. It was weird to think of him hurting folks, almost unheard of, and most people either laughed these comments off or told them it wasn't something to joke about. I could understand where they were coming from, and I didn't think some of them were joking. The tone of the video had shifted pretty quickly and it had been a huge tonal shift. I finished up my stuff, listening to something different to fill the void, and when I packed up to go home, the video was still on my mind. I kept an eye on the channel for the next few days, watching for updates and watching what came out. Wildman stored some food in those pots, salted meat it looked like, and buried them near camp. Wildman made a stew from some of the meat and some forest greenery. It rained and Wildman sat out in a poncho and listened to it as it washed over him. Wildman showed us a little female that had taken to visiting Scamper, and he reflected that the little raccoon might return to nature soon. There were a few others, but someone in the comments asked where he had gotten his new poncho, and that caught my eye. Wildman responded that he'd had it for a while, but this was the first time he'd used it. Someone else asked if maybe he had taken it from the campers he'd scared off the other day, but he didn't respond. That got me thinking, though, and I went back to the video to see if they were right. It was a little hard to tell, but the jacket did look a bit like the windbreaker that one of the campers was wearing. Had they left it behind when he scared them off? I didn't see how, since the guy was wearing it with the hood up the last time we saw him, and that made me think about that shoe again. Some things weren't adding up, and it was a mystery that I was interested in getting some answers to. Wildman had only been on TikTok for a year, but he had been on YouTube for about 5 years. He had started out doing those videos that you sometimes saw on those channels from South America, the ones where they made ponds and pools and things by hand. He had a couple of videos about hand digging latrines and water reservoirs by hand, building fire pits or lean-tos, and even one where he tried to build a log cabin, though it hadn't gone well and he had torn it apart. Something I was interested in, however, were the videos where he went walking in the woods at night. They seemed to be a running thing for him, and a lot of people said they liked the soothing forest sounds while they were trying to fall asleep. He had done about one a week since he started his channel, and as I ran through the comments on a few of them, I noticed someone who was putting timestamps in some of them. The timestamps usually had comments asking why he had stamped this part, but he never responded. The timestamps turned out to be exactly what I had been looking for, though. The timestamps were always for parts of the video where he encountered people in the woods. Most of these encounters were very similar to the one I had seen earlier. He would stalk the site, looking at the people, and generally wouldn't say a word as he watched them. Most of them were just people out hiking or vagrants in the woods looking for a place to stay, but these videos were very different from his usual upbeat content. They felt very sinister, very off, and the more I watched them, the less I liked them. I went to the profile of the guy who kept leaving the timestamp, Forest Friend 66, and he had compiled some videos too, some videos about Woodleman. His videos were usually compilations of the Wildman and the videos where he stalked campsites. Then he would circle something in the still frame and flash to a later video. A shirt from a hiker had become an arm bandage. A necklace, seen for a flash of a second, on a young woman, had made its way into a pile of things he was trying to sell at the pawn shop a few months later. He showed the shoe I had noticed and linked it to a day hiker Wildman had seen on a daytime hike he had been on. And, more chilling, sometimes the videos ended with missing posters from the Arkansas area. YouTube doesn't have a way to message people, but, thankfully, he was on TikTok as well. I sent him a message, asking if he believed Wildman might be hurting people, and a couple of hours later I got a response. Forest Friend 66, yeah, I do. I've been compiling evidence for years of what he's doing, but the authorities won't take me seriously. They say that lots of hikers go missing in the Arkansas woods. The woods aren't for the unskilled, and they don't believe that Wildman is real. I asked what he meant. Had they not seen his videos? Clearly, he was real. He had close to 500,000 subscribers. Forest Friend 66, they think it's an act, a spoof, just something he's doing for views. They say there is no way you could just live in the woods like that without serious shelters. They claim he would have no way to survive the winters in just a tent. I showed them the videos of him doing just that, but they're convinced it's an act. I asked what he was going to do about it, and he said he meant to get proof. Forest Friend 66, I'm going up there to find him. I have his general area pretty well figured out. Google Earth and the locations of the missing hikers have helped me pinpoint the area he's in, and I'm going to go get some proof of what he's doing. I'll wait till he's doing his stream, I'll go with my camera, and I'll wait till he leaves the camp and do some searching. Hopefully, I can get some footage of bones or clothes or something, and the police will have to believe me then. I'll do it live so I have proof even if he catches me. Keep an eye on my channel, I'll be heading up there very soon. I told him I would, and a few weeks later I got a notification that he was going live. I had gotten a similar notification a half hour earlier that Wildman was going live too. He had announced that he would be going hunting for some late-season deer, hoping to stock up for winter, and set out with his bow and his axe to find a couple of likely targets. Wildman headed out into the woods, whistling as he went with the raccoon pup following behind him. On Forest Friend 66's stream, I could see that he was watching Wildman leave the camp, getting as low as he could so the forest dweller wouldn't hear him. He waited for about 10 minutes, listening for the crunch of those hide moccasins, before he headed into his camp. The camp looked much the way it did in his videos, the large tent and the crackling fire and the little divot where he sometimes stored things so he could tarp them, and Forest Friend 66 moved quickly amongst them, looking for signs of the missing hikers. On his stream, Wildman was talking softly about tracking deer and looking for signs of their passing. The tent contained nothing but a sleeping bag and a few assorted tools. Forest Friend 66 was careful to put things back as he had found them, but the mess was so complete that it seemed almost needless. He went to the fire, but there was nothing there but old wood and old food remnants. He looked into the divot, but it was empty for now. He set about searching, looking for the hidden caches, but he didn't have a lot of time. On his stream, Wildman had found a likely tree and spotted a couple of deer grazing nearby. Forest Friend 66 was digging around randomly, trying to find something in the ground to prove his point. I remembered the pots and commented on his stream, of which I was the only watcher. He looked down, and I heard him mutter to himself as he tried to remember where those damn pots had been hidden. He dug around some, looking and hoping, and I turned back to Wildman's stream to see what he was doing. He was standing over the deer, an arrow sticking from it as he lifted it and headed back to camp. I commented again, telling Forest Friend that Wildman was returning, but he didn't see. I watched again later and saw that while he was looking, he had stuck his foot in a hole and broken through into a hidden cache of stuff. There were clothes, shoes, personal effects, and a fanny pack with cash and IDs in it. I would have thought Wildman would have no use for something like this, but it seemed he was not immune to keeping trophies of his kills. Forest Friend grabbed a bag, preparing to run, when he heard a noise and looked up in time to see Wildman coming back with his deer. On Wildman's stream, he saw Forest Friend and the two just stood for a moment and looked at the other. "Hello there, Forest Friend," Wildman intoned, the deer slipping off his shoulder. "Why don't you have a seat by the fire and tell me?" But Forest Friend was already running. Wildman dropped his phone in the dirt, his stream becoming dark, and I turned to Forest Friend so I could follow his progress. His escape became something akin to a Blair Witch sequence. He was running through the woods like a frightened deer, and I believed that he had now become the prey. He had to have had the camera in some kind of chest rig because I was definitely along for the ride. I was getting a little seasick, actually. He was running flat out, but in the peripheries, you could see Wildman keeping pace with him. He was toying with him, hurting him, keeping him moving towards something. Forest Friend was panting, running out of breath, but the farther he went, the less I saw of the shadow he had anchored. He seemed to be coming out of the woods, maybe to a road or a clearing, when something rose up in front of him and wrapped a meaty hand around the camera. I don't know if he broke it or simply turned it off, but I heard somebody say, "Hey there, Forest Friend," just before the feed cut off, and the tone was decidedly menacing. I saved a copy of the stream as quick as I could, not sure if Wildman would delete it or not, and called the police in the area around where he lived. I told them what had happened, and I sent them a link to the stream and a copy of the video, but they didn't seem too worried. They said people went missing in those woods all the time, and it didn't necessarily mean any foul play had occurred. As for the video, well, it was a good bit of acting, but they didn't believe it. The guy in the video is a nut. He sends us evidence all the time and it never pans out more than theories. As for Wildman, that's Thomas Land and he lives in town. The character he pretends to be is just that, a character. If he wants to put on buckskins and go play Tarzan, then that's his call. He owns all that land out there, after all, so it's his to hunt and fish as he feels like. They hung up on me, but it wasn't the last I heard about the matter. It's been a few hours since the stream, and I just got a message from Forest Friend 66. Well, no, I got a message from Thomas Land, aka Wildman, on Forest Friend's account. Forest Friend 66, hello, Forest Friend. I understand you've been talking to some not-so-friendly people. He's not going to be a problem anymore, but I do need you to be a pal and delete that video you have. Otherwise, I might have to pay you a visit next, friend. I've been sedentary for a while, but a trip might be just what I need to spice things up. I moved into my new apartment recently, excited to finally have my first place to call my own. It was a rundown shithole in one of the not-so-great parts of town, and I loved it immensely. I had gotten an amazing deal on the rent, only paying around $800 a month. Looking back, maybe that should have been my first red flag that something was wrong with the place, but at the time, I just thanked God for the opportunity. I was so broke at the time that I didn't even need help moving the small number of things I had. I hadn't even needed a truck, just the back seat of my car. By the end of that first night, my air mattress was inflated in my bedroom, the TV and Xbox was sitting on the floor of my living room, and my air fryer, my most prized possession, was sitting on my kitchen counter. Even after paying the deposit and first month's rent, I had enough left over for some beer. I leaned back on my air mattress, the only piece of furniture in the place, and cracked open a bottle of lager. It wasn't much, but to me, it was paradise. I went to go use the bathroom after the second beer, and while sitting on the toilet, noticed some graffiti scratched into the wall. "Leave right now." It had been haphazardly carved into the wall, as if whoever had did it was in a hurry. I thought it was kind of funny, but still resolved to get some paint to cover it up when I got paid next week. When I think back to it now, I wish I had sprinted to the door and gone right back home to my parents. A couple days came and went by, the eye of being on my own still fresh with me. The message on the wall vanished from my mind, and why shouldn't it? After all, it was just some stupid vandalism in my cheap apartment. I hadn't even looked that hard at it, just vaguely registering that it was there while 2 beers deep. That was, until the third day of my newfound freedom, when I noticed it wasn't the only message there. Just below it was another. "Get out now." The following morning, I picked up some plain white paint from the hardware store. There was a cute girl at the counter when I went to check out, her black hair cut at the shoulders and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. "Hey there, how you doing today?" I chirped as I walked up with my can of spray paint. "Well, I'm here, so that's a start," she replied with a smirk. "Glad to have you here." I glanced down at her name tag. "Talon." "That's not fair." "I don't know your name, and mine is literally written on my uniform," she said playfully. "It's Price," I answered, though she hadn't actually asked. "So why are you getting spray paint, Price? You're not some kind of street artist or something, are you?" "Nah, I just got a new place. Just touching up some spots where people scratch notes on my walls." I tried to sound as smooth as possible. After all, I had never had a place to bring a girl back to before. She finished checking me out, pausing to pull out a pen and write something on the back of my receipt. "Make sure to let me know if you need anything else. That's my personal number." "As you can tell, I take this job very seriously," she teased. I grinned so hard, it felt like the smile might pop off my face, and returned to my car. I kept grinning the whole way home. I got back inside and shut the door before realizing I had forgotten my paint in my car. I was still distracted by Kaylin actually giving me her number, and my thoughts were clearly elsewhere. I walked back to the door and went to open it, but it didn't budge. I yanked it a couple times and then gave it a mighty pull in frustration. It finally swung open, and I made a mental note to check the door frame next. A short while later, I was standing in my bathroom with the paint, covering up the 2 odd messages with a couple of quick bursts from the spray can. I felt like a real grown-up when I was finished, stepping back to admire my handiwork. My eyes caught another message in the wall up a little higher. "You're in danger." I laughed and covered it up. "I don't take advice from plaster, dickhead," I said out loud. That was the last I thought of it that day. I popped some chicken nuggets in the air fryer and cracked a beer. I pulled out my phone and texted Caden for the rest of the night, finding out about her interests and doing my best to come off cool and collected. Truthfully, I wanted to ask her out immediately, but wanted to play it cool. It seemed to work because she asked if she could come over tomorrow night. My face broke into that same overpowering grin I had driven home with when I read that text. It vanished when I went to use the bathroom and saw a new message on the wall. "You need to leave right now." This message was in the same spot I had seen the first one, and I was legitimately creeped out at that point. I searched my whole apartment to make sure no one was hiding in there, convinced that I wasn't alone. However, after sweeping the entire place, I didn't see how anyone could hide in the small, barren apartment. I ended up covering up the message with the spray paint and trying to forget about it. Still, I didn't sleep much that night, listening for any sounds in the apartment. The next morning, I wearily looked at the wall in my bathroom and was happy to see that it was bare of any additional writing. I sighed in relief, concluding that I must have just not noticed, or, if someone did break in, they were long gone and I'd have to just make sure I was locking my door from now on. Kaden came over that evening, immediately cracking jokes about how she loved the minimalist approach I took with the decor. I laughed at just about everything she said, drinking beer with her and taking hits from her bong that she had brought with her. I even dragged my air mattress into the living room so we could watch the original Night of the Living Dead together. The fact that it was one of her favorite movies made me wonder if I should marry her as quickly as possible, but I thought it best to keep that to myself for the time being. She excused herself to use the bathroom. When she came back out, she was laughing at me. "You still haven't painted the wall?" "I know you got the paint for it," she said with a mischievous grin. "What are you talking about? I painted it yesterday," I remarked, unable to keep the confusion out of my voice. "You must not have done a very good job, then," she chuckled. She went to lay back next to me, but I was already getting up. I didn't want her to see my worried expression as I went into the bathroom and looked for myself. There, on the wall, was another message. "This place is hell, you dipshit." So, not only was the graffiti there despite my 2 attempts to remove it, but now it was outright insulting me. I groaned and pulled out the spray can from under the sink, quickly covering it and pushing away the worry bubbling like Caden's bong in the back of mind. I figured I'd worry about whatever the hell this was when I didn't have a beautiful woman willing to hang out with me on my cheap air mattress. The rest of the night went great. Caden left a little after midnight and I walked her to her car. I even got to make out with her a little before she drove off. I was a little off kilter by the time I got back inside my apartment, the ambivalence of the evening leaving me torn in 2 directions. I walked into my bathroom and grabbed the spray can again. Even if there was nothing there now, I was annoyed with the constant back and forth, so I painted over the wall again, laying it on thick. I convinced myself that there must be some explanation for why this was happening that made perfect, logical sense, and I was just too dumb to figure it out. I decided not to worry about it and fell quickly asleep. The next morning, as I left to go to work, I peeked at the wall and saw it was empty. "Serves you right for calling me a dipshit," I said to it and headed for the door. The door got stuck again and I had to plant my foot on the wall next to it to yank it free. I was starting to think that my $800 apartment might be kind of shitty, but it was the reason I met Caden, so I was willing to give it a pass. I texted her throughout the day, flirting and feeling like I was on top of the world. We were already making plans to watch 28 Days Later next. If she kept being into awesome zombie movies, I wasn't going to be able to help myself from proposing to her. I got home and decided to clean a little to get the place ready for her next visit. I would even invest in a couple of folding chairs to give my air mattress a break. I was mopping my floors when I went into the bathroom and almost screamed out loud. There was a new message on the wall, this time stretching from the top corner to the bottom on the opposite side in large letters. "Get out and don't come back, Bryce." I painted over it again, wondering what in God's name was going on. I emptied the entire can this time, my heart pounding so hard that I thought I was going to faint. I stayed awake that night, staring at the wall, daring it to say something. By the time the gray fingers of the early morning gently touched the hallway outside the door, I felt completely drained. I knew I had to sleep, so I called into work and dragged my air mattress into the bathroom. I would be damned if the person doing this was going to keep messing with me. I slept fitfully, opening my eyes every couple of hours to inspect the wall. I considered the messages as I lay there. They kept telling me to leave, but all I could figure is maybe the apartment maintenance personnel or someone else who had a key was sneaking in and doing this. Whatever their reason, I didn't care. The apartment could be haunted for all I cared, but I wasn't about to be ran out of my home. After all, some stupid writing on the wall wasn't going to hurt me. I woke up as the sun was going back down, knowing I needed to get the folding chairs from my car to prepare for Caden coming over. I glanced at the wall before moving my air mattress back into my bedroom. Still no new messages. I walked to my front door and went to open it, but it was stuck again. I planted my foot on the wall next to it and heaved. Still stuck. I angrily kicked it so hard that I hurt my glute and planted both my feet on the wall, straining as hard as I could to rip the thing open. Finally, it gave way, causing me to fall backwards and hit my shoulders on the wooden floor hard enough to knock the air out of me. I went out to my car to get the chairs, and as I carried them back, I decided that I should start looking for a new place soon. It wouldn't be easy, but I could survive an extra couple $100 a month in rent. I'd just have to buy less beer. I got back inside and set up the chairs, then went to use the bathroom. I had only been gone for a second, and yet, there was another message. Last chance. I screamed in rage and put my fist through the wall. As soon as I did it, I cursed out loud. There goes my security deposit. Caden got over a short while later and we had a good time. I made taquitos in my air fryer for us and grabbed a couple beers. We barely watched the movie, making out so furiously that I fell out of the cheap folding chair. She laughed and followed me to the floor. It was the best night I think I've ever had. I walked her to the car again, kissing her goodbye, and then went back inside. It was late at night and the whole place was quiet. I went into my bathroom to inspect it and was unable to comprehend what I saw. There were no new messages. There was no hole either. Just a plain wall. I reached out and felt the spot where the hole should be and found that it felt normal, like no hole had ever been there. That's when I decided I was leaving. I began piling all my stuff by the front door, what little of it there was. I did one last walk through to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything, stopping when I got to my bedroom. It was the only room with a window. I stood there, staring at the bright sunlight pouring through it, even though it should have been the middle of the night. That's when I ran to the front door. All of my things were gone, the apartment looking like it had when I first moved in. I tried to force the front door open and it wasn't just stuck, but the knob wouldn't even turn. I screamed in terror and ran to the bedroom, kicking out at the window as hard as I could. Not only did it not break, it didn't even shake or make a sound as I struck it again and again. I got on my phone to call 911 and it just made a busy tone. I was fully panicking by the time I heard the front door unlock and open. What I saw only made me more distressed. It was me, moving into the apartment with my meager possessions. I screamed and yelled and even tried to grab myself, anything to get my attention, but my hands just passed right through me. I watched as I situated everything in the apartment. I even tried running out the door as the other me opened it, only to meet with an invisible wall that I hit hard enough to bruise my shoulder. I was so angry, I began pounding my fists against the wall. It occurred to me at that moment that I could still touch the apartment. I started scratching at the paint and saw it would flake off. In desperation, I scratched the words "leave right now" into the wall. I watched this play out, knowing my messages would be ignored. For some reason, the wall in the bathroom was the only one I could scratch the paint off of. I cried every time I watched myself paint over the wall, becoming more and more desperate. I figured this would be where I died, but it never happened. Finally, I watched myself as I punched a hole in the wall. At this point, I just walked into the living room and slumped against the door, sobbing with all my might. I watched as Caden came over and left, then watched as I began putting all my possessions by the door. I kept my face buried in my arms for a long time, missing my mom and dad, missing Caden, missing my damn air fryer. If it seems weird to miss that last thing, clearly, you don't own an air fryer. Eventually, I cried myself to sleep. When I woke up, I felt cool air on my face and saw that my front door was open. I reached out tentatively, expecting the invisible wall to collide with my hand as it had every other time I had tried, but instead, I fell forward, scraping my hand on the concrete as I passed through uninhibited. I looked behind me in disbelief, making sure I was really outside. I slowly climbed to my feet, then ran inside to start moving my stuff into my car. As I loaded up the last of my stuff, I slammed the door shut to the apartment one last time and got into my car. I felt my face break into a grin as I turned the key in the ignition. I slept over at my parents' that night and found a new apartment after a couple days. This one is a little nicer and I'm pretty sure it's in a vortex that'll suck me into hell. It's a couple $100 more a month than the last one, but I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. It's been a month since all that happened, and I haven't told anyone. Still, I drove by the old place last week and saw a young guy moving in. I started to say something to him, but realized I would just look like a crazy person if I did, so I just drove off. Tonight, Caden and I are watching The Shining. I already got chicken strips in the air fryer and a 6-pack in the fridge. I like it here and life is good. But if I see so much as a single letter on the wall here, I'm burning this place to the fucking ground. I stood in the square in front of Notre Dame and watched the stone gargoyles on the back of the cathedral. Dark clouds hung over Paris, making the city look sad and strange. One gargoyle stood out. Its face was twisted in pain, ugly and grotesque. It had 2 horns, but one was broken. That made it look almost like a devil. I stared at the creature and couldn't look away. That's how it is with terrible things in the world. You don't want to see them, but something inside you seeks out the ugly and the cruel. The clouds grew darker. I turned away from the gargoyles and looked around. The square was packed with tourists from everywhere, but my group was nowhere to be seen. My phone buzzed. I checked the message. We're at the Louvre. A moment later, the battery died. Great. No navigation. But people found their way before smartphones, I told myself, pulling out the crumpled city map I had taken from the hotel. I spotted a street sign on the corner and felt confident the worn-out map would do the job just fine. Behind me, Notre Dame and its grotesque gargoyles faded from view as I passed souvenir shops, cafes, and restaurants. But the farther I wandered into the maze of alleys, the narrower the streets became, and soon, the tourists were gone. I stepped into the alley. The old sign read Rue Saint-Pierre, but that name was nowhere on my map. My journey had started on Rue du Petit Pont, where I lost my group. Then I had walked through Rue Saint-Severin and turned onto Rue de la Parcaminerie. After that, Rue Saint-Pierre should have been next, but it wasn't on the map. This narrow street showed me a different side of Paris. No cafes, no restaurants, no pushy souvenir shops. Just a tight passage, flanked by old buildings that looked like they belonged to the Middle Ages. Every now and then, a small shop appeared, its dusty window displaying things I couldn't quite make out. I walked down the narrow alley when a sickly sweet stench hit my nose. It was a smell I couldn't quite place, cloying, overwhelming, laced with something rotten. The sheer absurdity of it made my stomach turn. I tried to imagine its source and landed on a bizarre theory. If you wrapped a rotting mango in spoiled pork and left it on a sun-baked terrace for a scorching summer day, this is what it would smell like. I pinched my nose shut and glanced around, expecting to see others reacting to the foul odor. But there was no one. I had been so focused on finding my way that I hadn't noticed the silence creeping in. The usual hum of tourists, locals, and street vendors had vanished. The alley, dim and lifeless, pressed in around me. The stagnant air, the eerie quiet, the suffocating stench, it all set my nerves on edge. And as the mango pork stench thickened, the headache returned. That same dull, relentless pounding that had plagued me for weeks. And with the pain came the images. The ones I had buried. The ones that were now clawing their way back. It all escalated that day. I never wanted this. But in extreme situations, we become animals. Corner a scorpion, and it will strike. That's just nature, I told myself. When he raised his fist, I plunged the knife in. Then there was silence. Silence forever. I kept walking. The narrow street grew darker, and the sickly sweet smell faded, or maybe I had just gotten used to it. I glanced at my crumpled map. If I followed this alley, I'd eventually reach the Seine. From there, the Louvre was just a short walk away, where my group was waiting. The gaps between the cobblestones grew wider. The houses looked crooked, uneven, almost like something from a fairy tale. I stopped in front of a bakery and looked through the big window. Cakes, eclairs, and pastries were lined up neatly. Under each one was a small sign with a name written in careful handwriting. Frederick Zaylis. Manuel Onyx. Gregor Francus. I read the names again. They sounded familiar. Too familiar. A sharp pain shot through my head. I reached for my pills, but my hands were shaking. It was too late. The terrible images came first. As he lay there, no longer breathing, it took me almost 10 minutes to realize that he was dead. At first I felt nothing. And from the depths of this nothing came sheer panic. I threw the knife into a gully and fled into the woods. When you kill a person, you imagine the dead person's life, with all its ups and downs. And then you imagine that these ups and downs have become a monotonous line. And the reason for this monotonous line is yourself. And this thought either leaves you cold, or it destroys you. I placed the pill on my tongue and swallowed it dry. As I traced its path down my dry throat, I saw a figure at the end of the alley. It was an old man, walking slightly bent. He came closer, stopped in front of me, looked up, and his gaze seemed almost as if he knew me, as if he knew he'd meet me here. The old man studied me like a distant relative who hadn't seen me in decades. Then his gaze shifted to the pastries in the window and the name tags, and he smiled. "Excuse me, how do I get to the Seine?" I held up the map. "You go down here, then left, then down here and left," he said without looking at the map, emphasizing the U. I started to move slowly, but hesitated, which the old man seemed to notice. Yes, just go straight and then left." The narrow, dark alley opened up into a large cobblestone square, barely brighter as the clouds over the city darkened even more. In the middle, there was a crowd, but I couldn't initially see what caused the gathering. In the center was some kind of platform, and only after a second look did I realize it was a guillotine. A decapitation machine that had taken half the population's heads during the French Revolution. On the platform stood a man in a red hat, giving a speech, and in front of the small stairs leading to the platform, a few uniformed police officers stood. "Karl Hobelbein," the man on the platform shouted, and the police officers cleared the way, allowing a young man to ascend the small stairs to the platform. A brief sense of excitement washed over me. The city was so thrilling, always offering something new to keep the huge influx of tourists coming. From talented street musicians to such live performances, there was always something grand to entertain on the streets of Paris. For a moment, I was even glad I had lost my group, as I would now experience something my friends would never see. The man in the red hat took on the role of the judge. He stood there proudly, holding a piece of paper that he seemed eager to share with the curious crowd. But when the judge began to speak in a loud voice, I couldn't hear a word, as new headaches suddenly overwhelmed me. It felt like a speeding train hitting me at 250 kilometers per hour. This time, the pain was sharper and more agonizing than ever before. I followed the news reporting on the discovery of the body and the search for the perpetrator. I was torn inside. If I turn myself into the police, then I'm giving up my freedom. But if I don't, I might never get rid of the guilt. I thought about the moment when the guy stopped breathing. The moment his soul left his body and all that lay before him was a jumbled collection of cells. Lifeless biological trash. The man on the platform cut off the young man's collar and, together with two policemen, placed him on the stretcher and put his head through the specially provided opening. The young man did not seem to protest, but radiated a certain calm. The tension in the audience was the same tension you would find in a soccer stadium if your team was awarded a penalty. People stared spellbound at the guillotine on which the young man was lying and followed every movement made on the platform. The judge on the platform walked a semicircle around the cleaver, shouted in the name of your own law and pulled the rope. The sharp axe flew to the ground at breakneck speed and severed the young man's head. The head landed on the ground with a smacking motion and I looked into the dead man's expressionless face. A small pool of blood collected on the ground and individual arteries and veins spewed the last contents of blood onto the dark cobblestones. The crowd applauded and I searched for logical explanations. It must be some kind of 3D technology. A hologram. Something ultramodern or a simple perception trick. People used to go wild when illusionists sought up women on stage and now it's a live decapitation. One of the policemen lifted up the severed head and showed it to the audience, who were now almost unstoppable with enthusiasm. He then tossed it carelessly into a large wooden box, which already contained a dozen severed heads. of men and women of almost all ages. And this box of severed heads was the source of the sickening mango pork stench I had already smelled in the narrow alley. This wasn't 3D technology, and it wasn't an illusion. These people were being executed in cold blood. I stood there rooted to the spot, unable to realize what had just happened. Then a single thought came to me: escape. I took a deep breath and plucked up the courage. But I walked off very slowly. Just like a normal onlooker who had run out of steam and just wanted to get home. I squeezed my way through the crowd when I suddenly stopped and my face turned white as snow. Because the judge was standing on the podium with a new document and called out a new name. My name. Levin Kenstadt, the judge called out, and the crowd began to whisper. The audience whispered and looked around curiously. They knew the chosen one was among them. When I accidentally bumped into someone in the audience and drew attention to myself, everyone suddenly turned to look at me. I ran off and pushed everyone in my way aside. I managed to break out of the crowd, but shortly afterwards my hatred of cobblestones made itself felt, because the individual stones were different sizes and the distance between them varied, so they couldn't give me any real grip, and I started to stumble. I pulled my arms up and swung them in all directions to regain my balance. But just before I could reach the alley, two dark figures suddenly appeared. Two policemen who brought me to the ground with a well-aimed punch. To the cheers of the crowd, they dragged me onto the platform while blood dripped incessantly from my nose onto the cobblestones. And now I recognized a familiar face in the middle of the front row. It was the old man I had asked for directions in the alley. He stood there calmly and smiled at me. Every time I tried to break away, the policeman punched me in the stomach. The judge didn't even look at me, but turned to the audience. For disregarding your own principles. Lying, robbery, manipulation in several cases, and murder in one case. In the name of my own law, I sentence Levin Kenstadt to death by guillotine, the judge said in a harsh voice. Weakened by the pain, I was maneuvered onto the stretcher almost with ease. From the outside, I seemed just as introverted and calm as the candidate who was beheaded in front of him. The wooden device was closed around my neck, and I felt the warm wood as it nestled around my neck. I felt the warm blood of my predecessors as it slowly ran down my back. A strange tingling sensation ran through my body. This tingling started in my neck and flowed down my spine. Then my abdomen tensed up. I could feel my own urine flowing down my leg. I curled my fingers into the wood and closed my eyes. The judge walked another half circle around the guillotine. In the name of your own law, he shouted into the audience. I heard the cord trigger the mechanism. Click. My last thought as the guillotine came hurtling towards my neck was of my guilt. A blink of an eye later, my soul would leave my body, leaving only a tangled collection of cells behind. Lifeless biological trash. Nothing more. Never in my life did I imagine having such a job as this. Yet here I was. I found a job listing for a company called Bell, Home Security and Surveillance. With paid training. Bills were stacking up and I wasn't getting any replies, so I filled out an application. Received an email almost instantly telling me I got the job. No interview? I thought. A document contract was attached to the email. A DMCA. The email read that I got the job, and to keep it, I had to sign the contract and essentially promise not to speak or share details of my training and position. I was in no position to argue or complain, so I signed. Didn't even read the entire contract, which I know I should have. Come October 1st, it was time for my big first day. I was asked to arrive around 9 p.m. Seemed like I would have the graveyard shift. I put the address on my GPS, but nothing came up. I searched it up and nothing. As I was about to email the company, my GPS automatically refreshed and started giving directions. I was puzzled but paid it no mind. Didn't want to be late on my first day. I started the engine and drove off. The office building lay far from the city in the outskirts. Deep, and I mean deep into the vast woods. A road veered off from the highway which I had to take to get there. I drove across this bridge over a small river and finally arrived at my destination. The building had a weird shape to it, unlike anything I'd seen. Instead of your usual boxy structure, the building was tilted as if about to fall over. No windows or doors were visible. Just white walls without a single speck of dirt or dust. I left my car at the parking lot before the building and got out. I approached the wall, which suddenly slid open. A man in a black tuxedo greeted me, "Mr. James Morgan. Welcome to Bell. We're happy to have you." "I'm happy to be here." I shook his hand and followed him inside. We walked down various empty halls with no rooms in sight. I remember looking up to see the walls reach for the sky with no ceiling in sight. The man stopped at a corner and pressed his hand against the wall, which slid open like the entrance. Inside was a small office complete with a desk, computer, and 3 chairs. Cabinets and drawers were stacked with papers. "Please, Mr. Morgan, take a seat." I took the closest seat as he took the one behind the desk. "Mr. Morgan, here at Bell, Home Security and Surveillance, we take our job graciously in ensuring safety to our customers from all dangers." I just nodded as he went along. Dangers come in many forms. Theft, break-in. But we specifically specialize in a very specific kind of danger. "What kind of danger? Tell me, Mr. Morgan. Do you believe in ghosts?" Lost for words, I wasn't sure how to respond. I mean, how do you respond to such a question in such an out-of-place scenario? I'm an open-minded person. I see what I believe. Do you know why the company's name and logo is a bell? No. It's named after the Bell family. A religious family that lived in a church with a notable bell tower. He retrieved an old photo from the cabinet behind him and placed it on the desk. They were known for ringing the bell every time danger appeared, to alert the town not from any invading armies but from witches. Taken aback from his words, I glanced down at the photo to find an old family from the 1800s holding pitchforks and torches. That's where it began. And we have continued their legacy ever since. Wait. You're a home security company that warns people about ghosts? We wait for a sign of paranormal activity. Thoroughly investigated from here, using the cameras and sensors. If needed, we also use our hidden drones to properly scout the place. He returned the photo to the cabinet and continued. If a creature or otherworldly entity poses a threat, we immediately send a list of instructions to our client that share just enough details to know what type of entity is in their house and what to do. He leaned back on his chair and held his hands together. As our friends back here guide the client to safety, A team is dispatched to that location to deal with the entity. They then have 3 options: capture the entity, neutralize it, or eliminate it. So you're ghost hunters. We're no different than any other home security organization. We just take it a little further. Unreal, I thought. A dream. If not, then what? Okay. So what am I gonna do exactly? You'll be part of the team that deals with the entities directly. That's where the paid training comes into play. He stands up and waves me towards the door. After you. We left his office and headed further into the hallways, eventually coming across a locker room near a giant garage. A guy in a black uniform stepped out. James Morgan, I take it. I shaked his hand. Pleasure to meet you. The name's Michael. Michael Waters. And the pleasure is all mine. A little bell was pinned to his shirt along with a name tag. Let's get you into one of these, shall we? I nodded my head and turned to find the previous man now gone. Didn't recall hearing his footsteps either. In the locker room, I was handed a black t-shirt and pants, a belt with a few pouches for storing stuff, and a little bell and name tag. Nervous? Michael asked. Are we really ghost hunters, or was that man just messing with me? What man? The man. The guy in the tuxedo that walked me over here. He was standing right next to me. Oh, I see. Don't worry. Nobody could see the woman that hired me either. Michael began loading equipment onto a black van with a satellite on top. A giant yellow bell on its side really pushes the little theory me and my folks got going on. And what's that? The company is run by ghosts. Good ghosts hunting bad ghosts? Or something else, and probably much worse. Yeah, we help people. But I think it's all theatrics. What do you mean by that? Ghosts or not, you need money to get your resources. So they pose as a home security company. Help people on the side who then talk about the great, wonderful customer service we provide. Refer their friends and families. Pretend to be the good guys so people pay them to do what they only care about? Yes. Not every time though. Some of my folks were told to purposefully leave customers in danger and fend for themselves. Can't sell home security if all homes are safe, you know. It was a lot to take in. I was ready to just leave and pretend this was just a bad dream, but I guess Michael took notice. I wouldn't leave. It's too late now. Too late. I don't know what happens when you leave. I do know that everyone that quits or walks out is never seen from again. I froze in place. Did Michael just threaten me? Had a good friend. He applied for this job despite my disagreement. You see, they find us losers who are stuck in debt. People that can't find a job. Promise us a huge paycheck. They do pay us. He placed a container into the van and shut the doors, but when my friend decided he had enough, he walked out and couldn't find him anywhere. Never went home. Nobody's seen him. Michael takes the keys from the wall and heads towards the front of the van. I reluctantly stepped into the passenger seat as he took the driver's. We're in this together now, James. I got your back if you got mine's. I sighed, accepting my fate. Michael started the van and we drove off. We were driving along the highway when a female voice came over the radio. Agents Waters and Morgan. Possible level 4 entity detected. Level 4 entity? An entity that can be dealt with or handled. What about the other levels? A level 5 entity can be left alone. A level 4 entity can only be left alone under surveillance. Level 3 is an entity that must be dealt with right away. Level 2 is an entity that has a very specific way of dealing with. Level 1 is an entity that is out of our control. What levels are more frequent? Level 4 is the most common. I haven't been called to deal with any entities above them. We finally arrived at the address the female voice sent us and parked the van up front. Michael got out of the car and walked up to the house. I followed behind. He handed me an earpiece as he placed another in his ear. It's so Sharon can communicate with us. Sharon? The lady in the radio. Oh. Michael was about to knock on the door when we heard Sharon again. The client has vacated the premises. Proceed to enter. He carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside. I walked in after him and looked around the dark living room. I was ready to try the switch, but Michael stopped me. Even something as simple as the light turning on could upset or trigger these things. Best to leave it alone for now. He pulled out a tablet from the bag he was carrying and switched it on. It glowed a blue hue, bright enough to see the screen and nothing else. What are you doing? Just getting ready to gather some information. I glanced around and waited to see any sort of sign that a ghost was present. Nothing. Sharon, can you tell us what you got? Affirmative. Level 4 entity detected at 22:41 hours. Subject has the appearance of a female, 11 years in age. Subject is currently upstairs on the first bedroom to the right. Well do. I followed Michael upstairs to the mentioned room. When we entered, we did indeed find the girl Sharon talked about. Up to this point, I was just playing along with everyone else. Was still having trouble believing everything I'd been told. But any and all doubts went away as I laid my eyes on the girl. She was normal in terms of looks. She just so happened to be standing on the goddamn ceiling. Michael. Sharon, we found the entity. He proceeded to approach the girl. Hey sweetie. Why don't you go ahead and come down to us? I stayed by the door and watched as Michael pulled out a piece of candy from his pouch. I got candy. You like candy? As he unwrapped and offered it to her, the girl started to slowly descend. My eyes widened and heart raced as red bloody hands ripped through the girl's feet as the body lowered itself. The right hand inside the girl's left foot let go of the ceiling and reached for the candy. I can't even, nor do I want to describe where the head of the thing came out from. All I'll say is it came out from between her legs. The thing snatched the candy out of Michael's grasp and shoved it in its mouth. Other parts of its body soon began to emerge out of the skin. Like a person with no flesh who put on their clothes backwards. Wearing the shirt as pants, and the pants as a shirt. All you could make out from what parts were visible was that the thing had no skin and probably why it used the girl's corpse as clothing. Michael seemed so unfazed, yet I was starting to panic. I lost my cool and darted downstairs and towards the exit. James. No! I heard a piercing cry behind me, accompanied by a loud crash. I turned around to find the thing chasing after me. The skin of the girl I was wearing started peeling away. I screamed and reached for the door when Michael opened fire on the thing. It stumbled into the wall and onto the floor. The thing was still breathing but severely wounded. "Sharon, we require medical attention." I checked for any injuries on myself and looked at Michael. "I'm fine." "It's not for you or me." He pressed 2 fingers against the thing's neck. "You want to save that thing? It tried to kill me. It's the job. Capture these things and keep them out of trouble." "You're insane." "You filled out the application and put on the uniform. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." "I'm leaving." "I told you what happens if you leave." "Coincidence." "That's all." "Okay. If you're so sure. Go ahead. Walk away." "I hate this job. I think the reason I get away talking about it is because no one would in their right mind believe such a ridiculous story. Still work there, of course. The pay is beyond great. I got my own house now. Car of my dreams. Thought if I lived a good life doing what I always wanted to do, it would take my mind away from the horrors I have to live through working there. But every morning, after saying goodbye to Michael and heading home, I dread the day that we both encounter something beyond our control. The day we don't clock out. I write this now to anyone who may dare read and take my story to heart. While I still can tell that story. Because tonight I go back to work. Michael called me in the late afternoon telling me to have a nice meal and do an activity I love. We survived this long, Michael. We can push through another night. It's a level 2.